So some of the online students have sent me the answers, but last 3 days I was not feeling well, so I could not evaluate your answer. So today I'll try to clear some of the answers on the basis of seniority. So what is on the basis of seniority? Depending upon who has sent me the answers earlier. And for the offline students, for few I have done, I think. So today I'll try to clear the other things, okay? All right, shall we move to the next part of the subject? Okay, what we have seen in the last class, we have tried to understand the company rule is done. So we'll take few moments to just revise what we have seen. And also in case if you have any queries, I'll take up that. And then we'll move on to what is called as the crown rule, which is again very important, okay? You can expect one question. I think last year also there was one question. I think 2023, I remember, there was one question. Which act designated the Governor General of Bengal as the Governor General of India? So which act has done that? It was a Charter Act of 1833. So probably you can expect one question in the prelims examination. And in fact, in the company rule, I would say the most important thing is 1833. And in the crown rule, it is 1835, along with 1919 also. Okay, so we'll try to understand the major changes. Okay, so where did we start? We start with the Regulating Act of 1773. So what was the purpose to regulate the affairs of the East India Company? Because that is the time they thought that the affairs of the company was not doing well. So they wanted to regulate it. And what are the major changes they have brought in? At least if you can remember one or two things. First and foremost thing is, that is where the centralization has started. They started the centralization, and therefore they designated the Governor of Bengal as the Governor General of Bengal. And then they have established the Supreme Court of India. And they also had some element of control over the company officials with regard to whether they can take gifts from the native Indians or not. And because of the establishment of the Supreme Court, there was an issue. And that issue was rectified by the Act of Settlement, or the Amending Act of 1781. Majorly demarcated the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court and the Governor General Council. That was clarified. And then came 1784, the Pitt's India Act. So what was a major change that was brought in the Pitt's India Act? Very good. That brought in what is called as a dual system of government. What was the dual system that was established? Board of Control and Court of Directors. What was already in existence? Court of Directors. Now recently came what is called as Board of Directors. Can anyone tell me the difference between Court of Directors and Board of Control? Yes, Court of Directors. Very good. Very good. They were looking into the political administration. Basically, Court of Directors are nothing but they are the company owners, major stakeholders. But Board of Control were the representatives appointed by the British Crown. They were ministers in the British cabinet or high officials in the British government. And then came the Act of 1786. What is the significance of Act of 1786? Lord Cornwallis to be appointed as the Governor General of Bengal, for which he has laid down some condition. Those things were accepted. Especially he wanted to be the Commander-in-Chief of the army. So that also we have seen. And then the next act is Charter Act of 1793, which extended the rights of the company to trade for another 20 years. And any significant change in the Charter Act of 1793? If you can recollect. All those carried forward. What about the missionary activities? Was it allowed in the Charter Act of 1793 or in 1813? 1813, okay. So Charter Act 1793, only they just carried forward. The salaries to the Board of Control. So to the Board of Control and the staff members to be paid from the Indian revenue. And then the next thing is Charter Act of 1813. Major change in the Charter Act of 1813 is, first of all, they ended the monopoly of the company, except in areas of what? Except in areas of tea and trade with China, which completely came to an end when? By 1833, it completely came to an end. But in 1813 also, they restricted this. They allowed missionary activities. So these are all some significant changes. And then 1833 is significant for a number of reasons. First is they completely made the East India Company to be a political authority. They are no longer a commercial body. Second thing is that is also where it has reached a zenith of centralization. The Governor General of Bengal is designated as the Governor General of India. Who is the first such Governor General of India? Who was the first Governor General of Bengal? So please be clear about all those things. This is also the first time they try to introduce open competitive examination. But however, it did not become a reality because of the challenge from the Court of Directors. This is also the first time they started meeting separately for the legislative function and the executive function. The same Governor General Council, but they started separately meeting. And the only new member when they started functioning for legislative agenda is which member? The law member was part of it. Otherwise, the law member was not part of the executive council. And who was the law member? Lord Macaulay. And this is where the codification of laws have also started. So these are all the significance of 1833. 1853, if you see, for the first time, without giving any specific extension, they allowed the East India Company to carry out the rule in British India. But however, it soon came to an end after the revolt of 1857. If at all, if you see any major significant change, there was more expansion in the legislative council. That is, when the Governor General Executive Council is to meet for a legislative function, many members were added. In fact, 6 members were added. There were representation from the provinces also. So this is basically some of the changes. And the open competitive examination became a reality. So it's became a reality, which means there was a provision, but after a couple of years, it became a reality. Okay, so this was the major changes that has happened in the Charter Act of 1853. Is it clear till this point of time? Yes, codification is already started, which means they appointed the law member, and that's the starting point. It did not happen immediately, but before 1853, it has already started, the codification of laws. Okay, so these are all the major things that you have to understand. Now, subsequent to that, what has happened is, you know that the revolt of 1857. And revolt of 1857, the Britishers realized that the company was not in a better position to administer British India. And there were some inherent flaws in their policies as well with regard to the administration. And especially they realized that centralization is not a way by which they can carry out the administration. So therefore, they have made certain changes in the way that they would administer. But most importantly, that is a time where they decided that the administration has to be directly taken up by the British Crown. So hence no longer East India Company would be a representative between the British Crown and the British India. So they thought that they will directly take up what is called as the administration. All right, so this is what you'll have to understand. So now let us try to understand the Crown Rule. Okay, so what is the era of the Crown Rule? 1858 till 1947 till the Indian Independence Act. So this is what is a Crown Rule. So let me majorly divide this Crown Rule into different things. So first is the Government of India Act 1858. So that's the first act, which is also called as Act of Good Governance. I'll discuss about all those things. Then the next major change is the Indian Councils Act. If you see the Indian Councils Act, Indian Councils Act of 1861, Indian Councils Act of 1892, Indian Councils Act of 1909. Then you have what is called as the Government of India Act. 1919, 1935. And then finally you have what is called as Indian Independence Act. So these are the changes that has happened during what is called as the Crown Rule. First, we'll have to understand these major changes. So all these things has happened during the Crown Rule, and the Indian Independence Act has given independence to India. Subsequently, India became an independent country. But however, try to understand after independence. Okay, please make a note of it if you want to make a note of it, and then I'll proceed further. These are the major things. So this is what we are going to cover in today's class. We are trying to cover all these things. Okay. Okay, before I proceed further, any doubts from the previous class? Have you all revised? How many of you have revised? All of you have revised? Okay. These are the major changes that has happened during what is called as the Crown Rule. So the first thing that has happened, have you made note? Okay, so the first thing that has happened is what is called as the Government of India Act 1858. This is also called as Act of Good Governance. Suppose if a question comes in the examination, which of the following is called as Act of Good Governance in India? So it is the Government of India Act 1858, Act of Good Governance. Do you know why it is called as Act of Good Governance? Why it was termed as Act of Good Governance in India? Very good. After 1857, that is the revolt of 1857, the Britishers wanted to show to the native Indians that they are making some reforms to bring in good governance in India, that we will in the future will avoid such what is called as revolt, which basically happened because of number of reasons. Because of the exploitation, because of the Sipais who were not happy. So basically they thought they wanted to show that we are trying to bring in some good reforms in India. So that's basically what is called as the Government of India Act 1858. But try to understand, the Government of India Act 1858 did not do any major change in terms of governance, but it was trying to do primarily one thing. What it was primarily trying to do? It is only trying to shift the authority from the hands of what is called as East India Company to a person who is called as a Secretary of State. So henceforth, who is going to be responsible for the administration in British India? It is a Secretary of State. So before that, who was responsible for the administration of British India? It was the Court of Directors and the Board of Control. So majorly it is Board of Control. See, the Governor General of India at that point of time also, he is an executive officer. He is not the highest decision making authority. So therefore now they have completely eliminated this dual system of governance, and instead of that there was only one single point of conduct who directly will be responsible for the British India administration is the Secretary of State. And who is the Secretary of State? The Secretary of State is the cabinet minister in the British government. Say for example, today we have a number of cabinet ministers. Say for example, today we have someone like an external affairs minister. Who is the external affairs minister today? Something like that. Similar to that, you can understand that there was one minister at that point of time in the British cabinet who is called as a Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State is a cabinet minister in the British government, and he will directly report with regard to the administration of British India to whom? To the Crown. So he is responsible for it, but he is the highest authority, but below him there are a lot of other people. So we'll try to understand all those things. So as of now, if you look into the essence, the only major change that has brought in is from the company, the authority has been taken away and it has been given to whom? It has been given to the Secretary of State. Assuming that the Secretary of State would directly administer the British India and he would bring in what is called as good reforms in India. So only that has happened by the Government of India Act 1858. Now this is the beginning of good governance. So now try to understand, this is the beginning of good governance. Now tell me, what are the ways by which you can improve the good governance in British India? Increase a legislative council, or if I have to put it in another word, can you show to the native Indians, that is from the Britishers' point of view, will they show it to the, or can they show it to the native Indians that we are doing good governance by making the governance more representative in nature? Is that the way by which they can tell that yes, we are trying to bring in good governance? So that is what has happened in what is called as the Councils Act. So the system of governance were made more representative in character. What does it mean when I say that the system of governance is made more representative in character? They try to accommodate more Indians in the Legislative Council as well as in the Executive Council. Although not much reforms was focused upon the Executive Council, but more reforms were focused upon what is called as a Legislative Council. Now, this is a system where the entire reforms, whatever the Britishers have brought in, majorly it was focused upon what? In the councils. That is, they were trying to reform the councils, and largely which council? The Legislative Council. To some extent, the reforms happened in the Executive Council also, but largely it was restricted to what is called as a Legislative Council. When I say largely the reforms were focused upon the Legislative Council, majorly they were trying to make the Legislative Council more representative in character. And how do they make the Legislative Council more representative in character? By allowing more Indians to be part of the Legislative Council. Now try to understand, till the Charter Act of 1853, there was no representation. And even if there is representation, it was not largely broader, allowing many Indians to be part of it. So now they are trying to make it more representative in character, gradually. And if you see from 1861 to 1892 to 1909, it was gradually increasing in terms of representation. More and more local native Indians were part of these things. So broadly, these all the three Councils Act, broadly the reforms were majorly focused upon what? Reforming the council, nothing more than that. That is why it is called as the Councils Act. Now, the next phase of reforms is the Government of India Act. I am not looking into a specific act right now. I am just discussing the major things. In fact, to write the broader answers, you should have these ideas. Okay. Now, come to the next thing, that is the Government of India Act Government of India Act, that is 1919 and 1935. Now, how do you think the Indian Councils Act is different from the Government of India Act 1919 and 1935? Change in executive. You mean to say changes in the Executive Council? This is majorly related to the Legislative Council, and minor reforms have happened in the Legislative Council also, Executive Council also. Do you know what kind of changes have happened in the Executive Council? Of course, more and more Indians were allowed to be part of the Legislative Council. But any change in the Legislative Council, any idea? Where the Indians were made part of the Executive Council? And for the first time, an Indian was made part of the Executive Council. Do you know by which Council Act an Indian was made part of the Executive Council? Any idea? Very, very important. Sometimes they have asked it in the prelims examination. 1861, 1892, 1909. Okay, you tell me which portfolio was given to him in the Executive Council. Very good. It was the law portfolio in 1909. Okay, we'll see as to who was nominated as we'll proceed further. For the first time, it happened in 1909. Anyways, how the Government of India 1919 and the Government of India 1935 was little different from these things. Well, these things focused upon majorly upon the councils, especially the Legislative Council, which was a very narrow area of reforms. But the reforms that has happened by the Government of India Act 1919 and the Government of India Act 1935 are much broader. They are broader reforms. So they looked into the reforms in the entire governance mechanism, especially the center-state relationship. They focused upon the provincial autonomy and the larger administrative structure of our country. So these are the reforms that was brought in by the Government of India Act 1919 and 1935. I'm just repeating it again. So here the reforms were not majorly focused upon the Legislative Council, but largely what was the focus? The focus was in the federal relationship, center-state relationship, the focus was on the larger administrative structure in our country, establishing public service commissions. So these were the focus on these things. So larger administrative structure was the focus. And then finally then it came to what is called as the Indian Independence Act. And what was the major provision of the Indian Independence Act? The only thing that has happened by the Indian Independence Act is India will be given an independence and with a dominion status. It was not a republic at that point of time. It was given independence with a dominion status. Okay, now India was given independence in 1947. And how do you think India was governed after the Indian Independence Act? India was given independence with a dominion status, but the Constituent Assembly of India was a sovereign body. It was sovereign to that extent, it is free to make the laws as it wants in the future to govern India. So when I say dominion status, it was still a body which was having full autonomy both internally as well as externally. But the only thing is India has to still recognize the British Crown as the head of the state, nothing more than that. So it has to still nominally recognize the Crown. But otherwise it was made a independent body. Independent state. But however, after Indian independence, there was something which is called as a Constituent Assembly. When the Constituent Assembly of India was established? Can anyone tell me when the Constituent Assembly was established? Very good, 1946. And this Constituent Assembly was established based on a specific plan. What was the plan based on which the Constituent Assembly of India was established? Very good, it was established based on the Cabinet Mission Plan, which I'll subsequently discuss. So Cabinet Mission Plan is based on a Constituent Assembly. So one of the major provision of this Indian Independence Act, the Indian Independence Act made the Constituent Assembly a sovereign body. What do you understand by sovereign body? It said that it was a sovereign body. Yes, what do you understand by sovereign body? Sovereign body means it's a supreme authority. So that means there is no restriction upon what type of laws can be made by the Constituent Assembly of India. So 1947, India was given independence with the dominion status, but yes, the Constituent Assembly of India was free to make law to govern future India. But however, even after the independence in 1947, do you know based on which law the Government of India was administered? Government of India Act 1935, because the Constituent Assembly was in the process of making the law. The Constituent Assembly of India was in the process of drafting the Constitution of India. And when did the Constituent Assembly adopted the Constitution of India? Can anyone tell me when did the Constituent Assembly adopted the Constitution of India? 26? Is it 26 November or 26 January 1950? Sure? My question is adopted. It was adopted on 26 November 1949 and the Constitution came into force on 26 January 1950. In fact, why I ask this particular question is the day of adoption of the Indian Constitution was also considered to be what is called as a Constitution Day. That was asked in the last year in UPSC examination. 26 January, is it considered to be the Constitution Day? Yes. 26 November was when the Constituent Assembly adopted the Indian Constitution, which is also declared to be what is called as a Constitution Day in our country. Okay, so till the time the Constituent Assembly adopted and enacted the Indian Constitution, India was governed by what? India was governed by the Government of India Act 1935. You should remember that as well. Okay, so these are all the broader things that you'll have to keep it in your mind. So now I'll go into the specifics, right? Starting from the Government of India Act 1858. That is also what is called as Act of Good Governance. Is that clear, the broader framework? All right. So now I'll go into the first act, that is the Government of India Act 1858. Okay, so what are the major changes that has happened by the Government of India Act, as I already discussed? The first major changes, they have transferred the administration from the company to the Crown. So till that point of time, who was taking up the administration? It was the company. Now it has been transferred to the Crown. But the crown means the crown does not directly look into that. The crown had a representative. And who was a representative of the crown? It was the Secretary of State, not the Viceroy. It was the Secretary of the State who was responsible for that. There's a difference between the Viceroy and the Secretary of State. It was the Secretary of State, but the Secretary of State had a 15-member advisory council. So they are an advisory body who will advise the Secretary of State. And who is the Secretary of State? He is a British cabinet minister. Who is advised by a 15-member council, which is majorly advisory, but the final decision will be taken by him. But however, try to understand, the Secretary of State is a British cabinet minister who is not sitting in India. He is not sitting in British India. Where he was sitting? He was sitting in Britain. So therefore, he cannot directly supervise the things that is happening, although ultimately he is authority to carry out the administration. So he need to have a representative who is sitting in India. And who is that representative who will be sitting in India? Who is called as a Viceroy. It was same as that of what is called as the Governor General of India. It is only the Governor General of India is redesignated as what is called as a Viceroy. That means still the Viceroy is the Chief Executive Officer of the East India Company. That means it is hence no longer called as East India Company, because it is directly taken up by whom? Directly taken up by the British India. So therefore, it is administrative structure of the British India, administrative structure of the British Crown in British India. So it is no longer called as what? East India Company. And who is the head of that administrative structure? It is the Viceroy. In the sense, who is the executive officer for that? Or you can say who is like the secretary to that. If you say who is, although the name is Secretary of State, he is like a minister. If you see the present administrative structure in India, you have a minister, and below the minister, who is there? The secretary is there. What is the role of the secretary? Now, tomorrow when you clear the IAS examination, the top position that you can reach is the secretary. So what is the major position of the secretary? Advise the minister, and also you implement the decision, policies, that is decision taken by the minister. So therefore, who is the minister at the top? It is the Secretary of State. And who is the secretary? It is the Viceroy, who is supposed to implement the things. Okay. So you have the Secretary of State at the top, and below that you have what is called as the Governor General, who is also renamed as what is called as a Viceroy. But however, try to understand, the Viceroy would be directly appointed by whom? The Viceroy would be directly appointed by the Crown. Very, very important. Earlier, the Governor General of India was appointed by whom? Excuse me, what is his name? What is your name? If you want to listen to the class, listen to the class. If you want to search something in your mobile, you do it in your mobile. Why come to the class and listening and searching and chatting in the mobile? Please listen to the class or use your mobile. Go out and you use your mobile. You don't have to give any explanation to me. Don't use your mobile. If you want to use your mobile, you go there. Okay. Okay. So who is someone who is responsible for the Indian administration? It is the Viceroy. All right. So the Viceroy would be directly appointed by the British Crown, and the Viceroy would report to whom? The Viceroy would report to the Secretary of the State. And who is the first such Viceroy? Lord Canning. Very, very important. You should remember certain things. So here you should remember Lord Canning. You have to remember Lord Warren Hastings, Lord William Bentinck, Lord Canning. These are all historically very important from the point of view of polity. And this act carried forward what was already there. And they also made sure that there is open competitive examination for the Indian Civil Service. Now, why do you think the 1858 Act, it was easy for them to carry out the open competitive examination? No pressure from the Court of Directors. It is no longer the company. So everything is directly taken up by whom? By the British Crown. So therefore, now there is no patronage system. Now there is no one who wanted to occupy this office. They wanted efficient people to be part of the administration. So the open competitive examination became a reality. But the biggest flaw of this is it continued for a long time to happen only in where? Only in Britain. It was not happening in India. So therefore, the native Indians were not largely part of the administration. It was open only to the Britishers. And who was the head of all those things? It was the Secretary of State who was responsible to carry out the administration. Is that clear? So these are all some of the major changes that has been brought in with regard to what is called as the Government of India Act 1858. And it is this Government of India Act 1858 which was also considered to be the act of good governance. So majorly they did not make any changes to the council, both to the executive council or the legislative council. What is the only major change that they have done? They have transferred the authority from what is called as the company to the British Crown directly. Is that clear? And instead of the court of directors and board of control, they brought one authority who is the Secretary of State. And the Secretary of State is to function with an advisory body and to whom the Viceroy will report. This is the only major change. So now come to the next thing, that is basically what is called as the Indian Councils Act. So as I said, all the Councils Act, majorly they focus upon reforms in the Legislative Council, but some changes have happened in the Executive Council also, but majorly the reforms in the Executive Council. So if you see all these councils, it was moving in this particular direction. So if you see, this is the representation of the native Indians. So if you see that this as a starting point of the representation, the representation over a period of time is increasing as we will proceed through 1861 to 1892 to 1909. But how do you think that the representation can increase? What are the ways by which the representation can increase? One is you bring more Indians into the legislative council. That is one way it can become more representative. What is the other way? Directly? Okay, so when for the first time do you think that the direct elections have happened? 19? Direct election is also a representation, but it has not happened immediately. When for the first time elections have happened? It can be an indirect election also. 19? 1909, you think the first time the elections have happened? 18? Very good. It was in 1892. For the first time, the indirect elections happened in 1892. Although the word indirect election is nowhere mentioned. The word that was mentioned is only nomination. In fact, carefully the British have avoided the term indirect election. They have not given this legal term, that is indirect election. So for the first time, the indirect election happened in 1892. But although the legal word that they have used is only what is called as nomination. We'll discuss that. So that means when for the first time the direct elections have happened? 1909. It was not in 1919. 1909, the direct elections have happened. So these are all very, very important area. They can ask you in the examination. Anyways, coming to the question, I said that the representation increased. So one is more number of members. Yes, is one way of having representation. What is the other way of having more representation? No, representation means basically what? Okay, you bring in more members. That is definitely a representation. Is there any other way by which you can say that there is representation? Or I am trying to ask, okay, you bring in more members and these members started asking questions. Is it increasing the representation of the Indians there? Means it is not only about the numbers, it is about what kind of functions that they do. So both will increase the representation. And to what extent they have powers with regard to the law that is being made. So that is also going to enhance the representation. So therefore, if you look into the way that the councils were performing starting 1861, it is increasing in terms of representation, not only in terms of numbers. Numbers were consistently increasing over a period of time, but their powers and their functions are also increasing over a period of time, starting 1861. We'll try to understand as to how they were increasing over a period of time. This is the very essence that you'll have to remember as to how it is becoming more representative in character. All right. So let us try to understand as to what are the major changes. So majorly the Act, that is 1861 Act, and the other acts also, they have made notable changes in both legislative as well as in the executive functions, council, sorry, but majorly were in the legislative council. So what are the changes that was brought in the executive council? Let me first try to understand the executive council. Expansion of the council by the 5th member. So initially, till this point of time, there were 4 members and the 5th member was brought in. And who was the 5th member? It was the law member. So the law member was not given much importance till that point of time. In addition to the home member, revenue, military, finance, there was one member who is also carrying forward what is called as a law member. That means they are all like ministers. So presently in the government of India, do you have they have Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers? So to some extent, you can assume who was occupying that particular position. The Viceroy was somewhere like the Prime Minister. But anyways, on top of the Viceroy, who is there? Secretary of State. But the Viceroy had some executive council, and the executive council had 5 members. And one was looking into home portfolio, revenue, military, finance, and law. And one major change that you should also remember is the Indian Council Act 1861 for the first time gives statutory recognition to what is called as a portfolio system. So the portfolio system was given what is called as the statutory recognition. What do you understand by portfolio system was given statutory recognition? First of all, what is portfolio system? Now, till 1858, or if you see before 1858, that is till 1853, who was largely carrying out the administration? Governor General in Executive Council. So, which is also called as a Governor General in Council. It is only Governor General in Council which is also separately meeting for the legislative agenda. So, who is majorly carrying out the administration? The Governor General in Council. But in the Governor General in Council, there were few members, but these members are not given any specific responsibility. All the responsibility is carried out by the Governor General, but with the advice of the other councils, other members in the council. They were not given any specific responsibility for a particular area. But however, that system was little inefficient. So now over a period of time, they wanted to increase efficiency. So now what has happened is, Lord Canning, when he became the Viceroy of India, he introduced what is called as a portfolio system. That means what he has done is, he had 5 council members. So he said among the 5 council members, everybody take up a specific responsibility. One of you take up the home portfolio, one carry out revenue, one carry out military, one carry out law. So he allocated the responsibility to each and every one. So therefore, he thought that the system would become more efficient and more accountable in nature. Do you think that this will make system more accountable and efficient? So he made a specific member responsible for a specific job. So therefore, if something goes wrong, he can fix the accountability and responsibility instead of collectively looking into the matter. So therefore, when they collectively look into the matter, you cannot fix the accountability. So such system is what is called as the portfolio system. A specific member being made responsible for a specific area in administration. Today, do you think in the government of India, we have a portfolio system? Do we have a portfolio system? Do we have a specific home minister? We do have a specific defense minister. We have a specific finance minister. We have a specific external affairs minister. So basically, this is nothing but the portfolio system. Therefore, if a question comes, what are all the impact upon the historical underpinning in the present system of governance in India? Can you understand how we have carried forward the portfolio system? So for the first time, portfolio system was introduced when? It was introduced by Lord Canning when? Not in 1861. It was introduced in 1859. So I said that the portfolio system was given statutory recognition in 1861. But my previous question was what? When was a portfolio system introduced? The portfolio system was introduced by Lord Canning in 1859. So I'll let you know the difference between these two things. So if at all the question comes, when was a portfolio system introduced? What is the answer? Portfolio system was introduced in 1859. Portfolio system was introduced in 1859. But when was a portfolio system given the statutory recognition is in 1861 by the Indian Councils Act. So can anyone understand the difference? When was a portfolio system introduced and when was a portfolio system given statutory recognition? That means Lord Canning, using his viceroy powers, by an executive order, he introduced what is called as a portfolio system. But however, it was recognized by a law only in 1861 by the Indian Council Act when the British Parliament has passed this law. So when was a portfolio system given statutory recognition? 1861. When was a portfolio system introduced? 1859. Okay, so and who introduced the portfolio system? Lord Canning. So these are all some major changes that has happened in the Executive Council. So one is, yes, 5th member was brought in. Lord Canning introduced a portfolio system, which is the foundation of the cabinet system today we have in our Indian administration. And when he has introduced 1859, portfolio system was given recognition in 1861. And it was a viceroy who was also having the power to make what is called as a transaction of business rules for more convenient transaction of the British India. So what do you understand by transaction of business rules? I'll explain that. Before that, you tell me now who is having the power to make transaction of business rules with regard to the union government? Who? Is it the president or the prime minister? Prime minister? Cabinet secretary? I do not know. President, prime minister, cabinet secretary. Who is having the power to make transaction of business rules for the union government? It is the president of India who has got the power. And do you know which article is giving this power to the president? Very good. Who said that? Very good. Article 77 of the Constitution is giving the president to make what is called as a transaction of business rules. But however, as I already said, that the president of India is not a real executive. While this power is given upon the president, but the president will do so on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. But however, this authority is entrusted in the hands of what is called as a president. And similarly, at the state level, do you know who has the authority to make the transaction of business rules? It is the governor. So, do you know which article is giving this power to the governor to make the transaction of business rules? Article 166 of the Constitution. So anyways, I'll discuss about all those things at the later stage, but just to make a comparative study, so therefore it becomes easier. So why I'm saying all those things? The entire objective of studying the historical underpinning is not knowing the historical underpinning. Because anyways, we have the Constitution. We are not least concerned about what happened before the commencement of the Constitution. But the idea is you should be able to know how the Indian Constitution was influenced by all these things, how we have carried forward certain things when the Constitution of India was drafted. So yes, there was the power that was given to the Viceroy who make transaction of business rules for more convenient transaction of the business of the British India at that point of time. What do you mean by transaction of business rules for more convenient transaction? Say, for example, first of all, who will decide how many different departments has to be there? So who is going to determine that? So there were 5 in 1861, but in the future it has to be expanded. Who will determine that? The Viceroy will have the power to determine that. The Viceroy can allocate different portfolios to different one. The Viceroy will determine as to how or who is the decision-making authority within a particular department. So the Viceroy will determine if 2 departments have to take a decision. Sometimes 2 departments has to combine and take a decision. So for example, Home Ministry and the Defense Ministry may have to combine and take a decision. In such a cases, how the decision is to be taken, who will overrule that particular decision. So all those things will determine what is called as a transaction of business rules. And who is authority to make all these things? It is the Viceroy. Okay, so that was also given statutory recognition under the Indian Council Act. And overall, if you see, it tried to improve. So whatever changes that they brought in, it tried to improve the efficiency of the administration in the Executive Council. So these are the major changes that has happened by what is called as the Indian Council Act in the Executive Council, but not major changes as in the Legislative Council. All right. So this is what with regard to the Executive Council. So please remember the portfolio system, when it was given statutory recognition, when it was introduced, and the next important thing is who was given the power to make the transaction of business rules? It was a Viceroy. Is it clear to all of you till this point of time? Yes, what is your question? So please wait for the lecture, okay? So I'll explain, and in case if it is not there, you can ask me the question. So you will later understand. So this is where gradually decentralization have started. You can say that it is almost 1858 has ended centralization. So moving forward from 1858 till 1935, 1935 is the zenith of what is called as decentralization. But the decentralization has started, if not decentralization, but gradually giving powers to the provinces have started from what is called as 1861, which we'll subsequently understand. Okay. Yeah. 1858 has done nothing. 1858 has not given any powers to the provinces. 1858 has done only one thing. What it has done? It has abolished the East India Company, and the power has been given to whom? Power has been given to the Secretary of State. But after 1858, starting from 1861, gradually, step by step, the decentralization process has started. Shall I move forward? Please be a little louder. Can I move forward? Okay. Okay, so come to the next thing. Changes that has happened in what is called as the Legislative Council. So what are the major changes that has happened in the Legislative Council? First of all, there is expansion of the Viceroy Executive Council when they perform the legislative business. This is again very important. Now what we have seen in 1833 and then in 1853 and then now in 1861, in all the three cases, there was no separate Legislative Council. Now, what has started in 1833 is the Viceroy Executive Council separately met when they are performing the legislative function. The same thing continued in 1853 also with more members, only when they are part of what is called as the legislative functions. So, how many new member was there in the legislative body when in 1833? One member, the law member. How many more members were in 1853? 6 members, but it has further gone for an expansion in what is called as the Indian Council Act. So the same Executive Council members will be anyway part of it, but in addition to that, more members will be part of it. Okay, so the expansion of the Viceroy Executive Council when they perform the legislative function, not less than half of them to be non-officials. This is very, very important. So we do not exactly know how many members, but whatever may be the exact members, not less than half of them to be what is called as non-officials. And the non-officials can be from both, can be Indians, native Indians, or they can be from English. So that means, let us assume the Viceroy Council. I'm just making it like this. The Viceroy Council, they are performing executive function. When they are performing executive function, how many people were there? Just now we have seen. How many members? 5 members. You have seen in the portfolio system. When they are performing executive functions, only 5 members. But when they are performing the legislative function, which is also called as a legislative council, not less than half of the members to be non-officials. Officials means, so you'll have to understand the difference between officials and non-officials. Officials means they're part of British government. They may be ministers, they may be higher officials. Not only the ministers, they can be servants of the British government. They're all officials. Non-officials means what? Non-officials means they're not part of the government. Anyone who's not a part of the government is a non-official. That means, to try to understand here, not less than half to be non-officials. If there are 5 officials, anyways, these 5 people will also be part of the Legislative Council. So 5 plus at least minimum 5. How many non-officials will be there? Minimum? Not less than half to be non-officials. That means how much? Not less than? If you put 1, it is not less than half. If you put 2, it is not less than half. So minimum 3 has to be there. Not even 3, then also it is, I think it should be, how? No, if you put 1 means 6. 6, so who is the majority? It is officials. 2 also, then they are still majority. 3 out of 8. Out of 8, it is still the majority. Even if you put 4, then it is still majority. So how many non-officials has to be there? At least minimum 5 non-officials has to be there. It is as simple as that. So minimum 5 non-officials has to be there. And these non-officials means they are not representing the British government, but they can be either Indians or they can be English. There are certain intellect from the Britishers, or they can be certain intellect from the Indians, certain representatives from the Indians. So any of those people, not less than half to be what is called as non-officials. And their functions were strictly restricted to what is called as legislation. That means here what is a major function of the non-officials there? They can only discuss about the bills. They cannot do anything about that. So what they can discuss here? Only about the bills. So whatever the legislative proposals were introduced, they can discuss about it. That means they cannot discuss about the budget. They cannot question the government. They cannot bring in any motion as it can happen in today's parliament. But what is their powers restricted to? Their powers restricted to discussing about the legislative proposals. But however, this is the starting point of the representative form of government. You brought in non-officials also, and you allowed them to have some element of discussions with regard to what is called as the legislative proposals. Okay. And despite all those things, the ordinance making power was given to the viceroy. This is again very important. On the one hand, you are allowing the non-officials to be part of the legislative council, allowing them to have some kind of discussion when it comes to the bills. But on top of that, who is supposed to make the ordinance? The viceroy can make the ordinance. Now remember, after the Government of India Act 1858, the appropriate word is viceroy. But in case if in the examination they are not using the word viceroy, and if they are giving the Governor General of India, then that is also right. Because I myself have seen in the UPSC examination, they use the expression the Governor General of India also. But anyways, what is the most appropriate thing? It is the viceroy. And the viceroy was given what is called as ordinance making power. So what is this ordinance making power? We already discussed about the ordinance. Can you recollect it? It is a temporary law made by the executives presently. And who is having this ordinance making power? President and the governor respectively. Which article is giving this power to the president? Very good. Article 123. Which article is giving the power to the governor? 213. A similar power, or in fact, at the time it was not a temporary law. In fact, it was more power to the viceroy, but the ordinance making power was given to the viceroy. To what extent the viceroy was having the ordinance making power, you don't have to worry about it. But just remember, the viceroy was having what is called as ordinance making power. That means you can understand that on the one hand, they are trying to say that we are making it more representative. But however, that can be overruled by whom? By the viceroy. That means the Britishers somehow wanted to show that they are making a system more representative in character. But ultimately, the power was concentrated in the hands of the viceroy. So these are the major changes that I would say that has happened with regard to the Legislative Council. Okay. But I said that this is also an era of what is called as decentralization, beginning of decentralization. Now remember, 1858 has not done any decentralization. 1858 majorly transferred the power from whom to whom? Transferred the power from the East India Company to the British Crown directly. But the gradual era of decentralization has started from 1861. That means how they have started restoring the powers of the other provinces. Now, when were the legislative powers of the provinces were deprived? In which, during the company rule, if you can recollect, which act has deprived the legislative powers of the provinces? Very good. Charter Act of 1833, because that is when we have learned that there is a zenith of centralization. But the Governor General of Bengal was made the Governor General of India. Not only that has happened, that the lawmaking powers of the provinces were also deprived. Now they gradually started restoring that. Okay, so when they were starting to restore that, they restored the powers of the Madras and Bombay province. To what extent they restored the powers of the Bombay and the Madras province? They restored the power of the Governor in Council of Bombay and Madras, which was deprived by the Charter Act of 1833. So what was the power that was deprived? The law-making powers were deprived. So now they are trying to restore that. And this is also the beginning where they are trying to have two types of councils. Okay, so first remember that they are trying to restore the powers of the Bombay and the Madras Council. That means basically the Legislative Council. And in addition to that, from now on, there will be two sets of council. That is, two sets of legislative council. One is the Legislative Council at Calcutta is also called as the Central Legislative Council. When for the first time the Central Legislature was explicitly recognized? Which act? If you can recollect, which also you have learned in the last class. 18? Very good. 1853 for the first time, the Legislative Council was recognized as the Central Legislative Council. But at that point of time, the provincial legislature was completely deprived. But now they are restoring the powers of the provincial legislature. So therefore, now they are trying to make the distinction. The Legislative Council in Calcutta is called as what? The Central Legislative Council, which is similar to that of the Union Legislature today. That is similar to that of the Parliament today. So the Legislative Council at Calcutta, the Legislative Council of Calcutta is headed by whom? Who is there? the Viceroy is there. The Viceroy Executive Council, in addition to that, the extra members. So, which will be called as the Central Legislative Council, which will make laws for the entire British India. So, they are empowered to make laws where? They were empowered to make laws for the entire British India. In addition to that, the provinces will have their own councils, legislative council, that is Bombay and Madras province. They'll have their own council and they will be able to make laws for their respective provinces. Okay, so this is one major change that has happened by the Indian Council Act 1861. And apart from that, most importantly, the act also authorized the Viceroy to create new legislative councils in few new provinces. What were the other provinces that was added at that point of time? The provinces like Northwestern provinces, Punjab provinces, and these provinces will have their own governors, and these provinces will have their own legislative council as well, in addition to the executive council. Now try to understand that wherever there is a new province, anyways, the governor will have an executive council, but in addition to that, there will be a legislative council also. So that means this is also the beginning of giving the powers back home to the provinces, not only to the Bombay and Madras province, but also the provinces that were newly created. They will also have their own legislative council. And those legislative council will have the power to make laws for their respective province. And which council will have the power to make laws for the entire country? It is the Central Legislative Council, which is nothing but the legislative council in what is called as Kolkata, or where the Viceroy was there. Is that clear to all of you? But however, not everything was given, but gradually you will understand that gradually more powers were given to them. Okay, so what are the significance of the Indian Councils Act? So whenever you learn certain things, you should also try to take out the essence of that, so that if in the mains examination, if you have to write the answers, you will not be able to write each and every point. Only whatever the major essence that you take out, you will be able to write the answer. So therefore, what is the significance? Does it lay the foundation for legislative devolution? Devolution means giving back some powers. So it laid the foundation for what is called as legislative devolution. It laid the foundation for what is called as legislative devolution, giving back powers to the provinces. That is again very, very important. It laid foundation for the cabinet form of government through what is called as portfolio system. Has it happened? When was a portfolio system introduced? 1859. And when it was given statutory recognition? 1861. It is the beginning of representative form of government. Is it true? It is also the beginning of representative form of government. And to what extent do you think that the representation was there? First of all, non-officials were part of it, which also included the Indians, and they were able to have discussions with regard to the legislative proposals. And to that extent, there was representation. So it was the beginning of representative form of government. There is no doubt in that. Is that clear to all of you? These are the major significance that you should remember for the mains examination. Now remember, when you write answers for the mains examination, it is not that you will bring all the specific facts. Wherever relevant facts you can bring in, but the larger essence has to be part of your answer. So that is when you will fetch the better marks. But however, what was the criticism of this act still? Although it is a beginning of representative form of government, it is not too representative, because what is the only power that was given to them? To discuss about the bills, nothing more than that. They are not able to criticize the government. They are not able to discuss budget, which is very important. They are not allowed to ask questions. They are not able to bring motions against the government. So all these powers are not given. And in fact, ultimately, they have given the power to discuss the bills, but the ordinance making power was given to the Viceroy. So anyways, this was not considered to be very representative. It was only a very marginal reforms that they have brought in, just to show the native Indians that the Britishers are interested in the welfare of the people and they are willing to accommodate the Indians in the administrative system. But that was not sufficient enough. So therefore, it has went to the next reforms, that is what is called as the Indian Council Act 1892. So every time, whenever they brought in a reform, it was a very marginal and an incremental reform. So let us see as to what kind of incremental reforms was brought in 1892. All right, shall I move forward to the next thing? 1892, is it clear to all of you? Okay, so please come to the next thing, that is 1892. That is the Indian Councils Act of 1892. Before I go to the Indian Councils Act, can anyone tell me what is the difference between the Viceroy and Secretary of State? Anyone?
State is the under the representative of Crown, and Viceroy is the representative of Crown in India.
Who appoints the Secretary of State? He is a cabinet minister. Who appoints that? Who appoints a cabinet minister?
Crown.
Of course, the Crown. Who appoints a Viceroy? That is also done by the Crown. That means try to understand, although the Secretary of State is the ultimate authority, even the Secretary of State does not have the power to appoint the Viceroy. The Viceroy is directly appointed by whom? By the British Crown. Okay, although the Viceroy has to report to the Secretary of State. Who was the first Viceroy? Lord Canning. Who introduced the portfolio system? When the portfolio system was given statutory recognition? 1861. And is 1861 anyway given the legislative powers back to the provinces? And they have tried to restore the legislative powers to the provinces. And this is also the beginning of the representative form of government. And to what extent do you think, when I talk of representation, what was the representation that was part of this particular act, and what is the criticism to the representation? The representation was largely restricted to discussion on the bills, and apart from that, there was also veto powers that was given to the Viceroy. Okay, so this is the major criticism. All right, so please come to the Indian Councils Act of 1892. Okay, so what was the major objective of the Indian Council Act? The major objective of the Indian Council Act 1892 is to expand the legislative council, both central and provinces. They wanted to expand it further. So already they have made non-officials as a part of the legislative council, and they wanted to expand this, not only at the central legislature, also in the provincial legislature. Because in 1861 itself, we have seen that there was a distinction of central and provincial legislature, because the provincial legislature's powers has been restored. So majorly they wanted to expand both the legislative council, both center as well as the provinces. Changes in the central legislative council. So what are the major changes? It increased the size of non-official members. It increased the size of non-official members. So I'm talking about the Central Legislative Council. So where is the Central Legislative Council? In Calcutta. So whatever is in Calcutta is a Central Legislative Council. So it increased the size of non-official members, although it still had official majority. So it increased the size of the non-official members, but although who had the majority? The officials. That means although it increased the number of non-officials, still who was majorly there? The officials. And what is the difference between officials and non-officials? Officials are someone who is part of the government. Non-officials are someone who is not part of the government. Although non-officials can be from both India as well as the Britishers, but still who was in majority in the Central Legislative Council? It was only the officials who was in majority. Non-officials. So where did the non-officials come from? Let us try to understand that as well. Where did the non-officials come from? Non-officials means basically who are not part of the British government. The non-officials are nominated by the provincial legislative councils. So at the time we had various provincial legislative councils. So who are those? Who are the provincial legislative councils? What are the provincial legislative councils? We had Madras, we had Bombay, we had Bengal, we had northwestern provinces. In fact, Bengal was also a legislative council. See, now Bengal was a province also. Bengal was having a central legislative council also. So Bengal, northwestern provinces, Chamber of Commerce in Calcutta. So from all these areas, the non-officials were there. The non-officials were nominated from the provincial legislative councils. That means I already asked a question that for the first time, when was the indirect election brought in? 1892. So in fact, this was a system of indirect election. Although legally this word was not used, but the historians have said for the first time the indirect election was brought in 1892. But the word that was legally used is what is called as nomination. That means what has happened is that from the Madras Legislative Council, somebody was indirectly elected from among the members there in the Legislative Council. And that member who was elected from the Madras province was representing what is called as the Central Legislative Council, and who was nominated there by the Viceroy. So therefore, there was a system of indirect election, but what was the official language that was used in the law? It was nomination. So therefore, if a question comes in the examination, when for the first time the indirect election was used, what is the answer? It is 1892. Although the legal word that is used is only what is called as nomination. Okay. So therefore, there were nomination from different areas. There was some commerce body also. There was nomination from there. There were nomination from some universities also. So this is how there were non-official members. Universities, intellectuals, professors, representatives from the provinces, all those people were part of the central legislative councils. And the next important change is right of these members in the legislative council increased. Now, initially, what was the right of these members? Only to discuss the bills, but now that has gone for an expansion. Now, over a period of time, you will see there were two types of expansion, two types of representation. One is the numbers will increase. Second is their functions and powers will also increase. And to what extent the powers and functions have increased? Initially, they were allowed to discuss only about the bills, but not only the bills. In addition to that, they are allowed to discuss about the budget as well. Not only the budget, they can raise questions of public importance. So the functions have also increased in the council. So in 1861, what was their function? Only to discuss about the law, that is the bill. But now, in addition to that, they can discuss about the budget. What is budget? It's the annual financial statement. Very good. But can you put it in another word? In a very layman word, what is budget? Very good. It is the estimated revenue as well as the estimated expenditure. It is a statement of estimated revenue and estimated expenditure. Why it is called as a statement of estimated revenue and estimated expenditure? It is of course brought earlier, but even when it is brought earlier, why it is called as estimated statement of estimated revenue and expenditure? So for example, you have to make a budget for this particular month for yourself. Now, are you staying in Delhi? You are staying in Delhi, so therefore your parents might send you the money, or maybe whatever your source, I do not know. Somebody is giving you the money, or you are making your own money, whatever it is. You are allocating, say, let us assume some 25,000 this particular month, for an example, let us assume. But that is only an estimated expenditure, I would say. Why it is called as an estimated expenditure? Because there can be some unforeseen circumstances where you may have to spend more. Sometimes you may cut down on certain expenditure also, which you are planning to make an expenditure. So therefore, only by the end of the month, you will know that. So therefore, when the budget is brought in, the budget is always called as statement of estimated revenue and estimated expenditure. So they can discuss about the budget. They can raise questions of public importance. What do you understand by questions of public importance? So anything which is part of the system of governance which has an impact upon the public, any policies, such questions can also be raised, which was not earlier allowed in the Indian Council Act of 1861. Is that clear? So two things you can understand. One is the representation has increased and their powers have also increased. So gradually we'll try to understand that how the powers are increasing over the period of time. But the most important thing that you have to remember here is that the system of indirect election was brought in. Okay, so that's one important area. So now let us see as to what are the changes that has been brought in the provincial legislature, because at both the levels the changes are brought in. So central legislature, we have seen what are the changes in the provincial legislature. There also it increases the size and the functions of the provincial legislative councils as well. And they also introduce a system of indirect election. So here also they have introduced a system of indirect election, but carefully the word has been avoided. What was the name that was used? Only the name nomination was used. Only it was the word nomination. So here from where the nomination have come, who was the nominating authority? In the Central Legislative Council, the nomination was done by the Viceroy. So therefore, in the Provincial Legislative Council, who will make the nomination? The governor will make the nomination of that particular province. So here, from where the nomination was coming, the nomination or the election was happening indirectly from the local bodies. the municipalities, the panchayat, the district boards, certain state level universities. From all these areas, people were indirectly elected, and the nomination was done by the governor of that particular province. Okay, so here also it was called indirect election. Here also their functions have increased. So similarly, when I talk of the functions, their functions include asking questions on public importance, to discuss about the budget at the provincial level. So these are all some of the functions that they have got. So what is the significance of this particular act? Now you can say this is the beginning of what is called as parliamentary democracy. Why it is called as the beginning of parliamentary democracy? Because now they are allowed to ask questions. This is very, very important. One of the important area of parliamentary democracy is that the executives have to be made accountable. Now, how do you think that the government can be made accountable by the legislature? Now, what is the essence of parliamentary democracy that you discussed earlier? The very first class. The executives are made accountable to whom? To the legislature. And how the executives are made accountable to the legislature? By asking questions. And for the first time in the history of British India, that in the legislative councils, the questions were allowed. So therefore, you can understand how the system has become parliamentary in nature. Okay. And then the principle of indirect election was also brought in, although the word indirect election was avoided. And what was the word that was used? Nomination. But for the examination, if they ask you when the indirect election brought in, it was in 1892, because after this there was a direct election in 1909. So therefore, you cannot say that it was in 1909. In 1909, they introduced a principle of direct election. And then it also enlarged the size and functions of the members, although still who are in majority. Still it was officials who was in majority both in the central as well as in the provincial legislature. That means the representation is still not very high enough, because the officials were still in majority. But the good part is they are allowed to ask questions. So these are all the major changes. So what are the significant changes that you have to remember in the Indian Councils Act 1892? It is the beginning of parliamentary democracy. Indirect elections were introduced, expanded the size and also the functions. All right. So just try to remember at least the significance, very, very important. Okay, that's why I have drawn the significance. The significance are not, I think, in your textbook. So I have made these inferences from all these things. Okay. This PPTs, if you want, you can take it. That is not an issue. So I'll tell them to share, or you can ask them, they'll share it. I'll tell them to share these things. Whoever want it, I'll put it in the group. You can take it. That is not an issue, because this will be easier for you to revise. But however, I'll say you make your own notes. That is even more better. But if you want for your references, you can take it. That is not an issue. Okay, now the next set of reform is also what is called as the Morley. Sorry, it is not Minto-Morley. Some mistake is there. It is Morley-Minto reforms. It should always be Morley-Minto reforms. Why it is called as Morley-Minto reforms? Because it is the Secretary of State first and then the Viceroy. And who is the Secretary of State? It was Morley who was the Secretary of State. So he is the Secretary of State. He is the Secretary of State. I think John Morley, Secretary of State, and Minto was the Viceroy. Morley-Minto reforms. Do not have any confusion, because it is a Secretary of State who is a superior. Okay, so Morley-Minto reforms. Now, the Morley-Minto reforms is also what is called as the Indian Councils Act 1909. Why it is called as Morley-Minto reforms or the Indian Council Act? Basically, these two people have had a lot of discussion, and based on their input, the British Parliament has enacted this particular law, and therefore it came to be what is called as the Morley-Minto reforms. And the Morley-Minto reforms is also significant for a number of reasons. Among the councils, I would say the most important thing is Morley-Minto reforms. Among the Government of India Act, both the things are very important, 1919 and 1935, for a number of reasons. But in the company rule, what is the most important thing? Charter Act of 1833, for the purpose of examination. Otherwise, you'll have to remember most of the things. Now, do you know one significant change that was brought in by Morley Minto? Very good. They have brought in what is called as separate electorate. So therefore, who came to be the father of communal electorate in our country? Lord Minto, because he was in India Viceroy, who was considered to be the father of communal electorate in our country. I'll discuss as to what is separate electorate and what is this system of communal representation as we'll proceed further. But let us try to understand the other significant provisions also with regard to the Indian Councils Act 1909. All right. So the act came to be called as the Morley-Minto reforms because the Secretary of State was Morley and the Viceroy was Minto. The act considerably increased the size and functions of both the central as well as the provincial legislature. That's the first thing that you have to remember. Now, over a period of time, I said, what are the two important changes that has happened in the council? One is the representation went on increasing starting 1861 till 1909. And not only the representation, but their functions also. So in 1861, what was their function? To discuss about the bills. In 1992, what was their function? Not only to discuss about the bills, but also discuss about the budget and to ask questions on public importance. But in 1909, you will understand they can discuss about the bills, they can discuss about the budget, they can ask questions. They can not only ask questions on public importance, they can ask what is called as supplementary questions. Now, what do you understand by supplementary questions? Very good, cross questions. Say, for example, when you ask me a doubt, I clarify your doubt, and you can ask me a subsequent doubt on whatever I say. That is basically what is called as supplementary questions. And they can bring in some motions also. So all these powers has been given. So their functions has been considerably increased over a period of time. Not only the functions, but their size also. But still try to understand, although the size was increased, but still there was official majority in the center. So who was still having the who was having the majority in the Central Legislative Council still? It is officials. That means they're part of the government. But however, in the provinces, who was having the majority? The non-officials were having the majority in the provinces. But this is again very significant. Till 1909, who was in majority? That is till 1892, who was in majority? It was only the officials, both at the Central Legislative Council, also in the Provincial Legislative Council. They were in majority. But for the first time, the Provincial Legislative Council, who was in majority? The non-officials were in majority, but in the Central Legislature, still the officials were in majority. Okay. And this also introduced a system of what is called as separate electorate. And who was having the separate electorate? Only the Muslims. And this is also the beginning of what is called as divide and rule in our country officially. So the first time the Britishers brought in what is called as divide and rule. Officially into India by introducing what is called as separate electorate. And this question has also been asked number of times, who is considered to be the father of communal electorate in our country? Who is considered to be the father of communal electorate? It is Lord Minto who is considered to be the father of communal electorate. But we'll have to understand as to what is this communal electorate or separate electorate. You know what is this communal electorate or separate electorate? Now remember, this is also when the system of direct election was introduced. But I said direct election means direct election on the basis of limited adult franchise. There was no universal adult franchise. There was only very limited people who were given the right to vote, which is even less than 10% of the population, which was given the right to vote, limited adult franchise. And do you know what is the basis on which their voting rights were given? It was on the basis of property, status, titles that somebody possessed. So this is the basis on which the right to vote was given, limited adult franchise. Now try to understand, suppose let us assume a province is there. Suppose let us assume this is a province. They divide this province into number of constituencies similar to that of what is there in India right now. Suppose let us assume 1, 2, 3. Let us assume this is Madras province 4, 5, 6 and 7. Suppose let us assume 7 constituencies are there. That means from every constituency, 1 member will be elected because they have introduced a system of direct election. But not all the people in these provinces were given the right to vote. Only how many people were given the right to vote? Very less than even 10%. based on, as I already said, their property, education, and all those things. Certain people are given the right to vote. Now, among this, what has happened? They have reserved certain number of seats for the Muslims. So, out of 7, let us assume 2 seats were reserved for Muslims. How many seats? 2 seats were reserved to Muslims. 5 is general. That means in these 2 seats, that means out of these 5, 2 constituencies were reserved to Muslims. Say, for example, let us assume constituency number 1 and 2 are reserved only to the Muslims. What does it mean it is reserved only to Muslims? Only the Muslim candidates can contest from these areas. Not only the Muslim candidates can contest from these areas. The worst part about this is only the Muslims can contest the election, and only the Muslim people in these constituencies will have the right to vote. The others will not have the right to vote. The opposition that the Indian politicians and the Indian National Congress was having is, anyways you are reserving these seats for the Muslims, and anyways who will get elected from here? Only the Muslim representative will get elected from here. So therefore you give the right to everyone. But instead of that, they are giving the right to vote to whom? Only to the Muslims in those constituencies, and that in that Muslims also, again, there is a system of limited adult franchise. Those who are educated, those who are well off, those who are having the property. So therefore, it becomes a system of what is called as communal electorate. So therefore, there will be a discrimination between Muslims and non-Muslims in these constituencies, which was not liked by the Indian National Congress. But anyways, the Indian Councils Act has brought in what is called as a system of communal electorate. And therefore, who became the father of communal electorate? It was Lord Minto. Is it clear? For the first time. So for 2 things, it is very significant. One, system of direct election, although there was limited adult franchise, and also system of what is called as communal electorate. Okay, so then it enlarged the functions of the council. So what was the functions? Pass resolutions on the budget. So they can pass resolutions on the budget. That is very important. Not only discuss the budget. What do you mean we pass resolutions on the budget? Very good. So there is something which is called as cut motions. Have you ever heard of cut motions? Which is a very advanced concept. If somebody is knowing about it, probably they have an idea already. They have read it. Now, say for example, if I am the finance minister, let us assume I am the finance minister. So I am bringing in the budget where I am saying that I want to allocate 100 crores for defense this year. And this is the legislative body. Assume that this legislative, you are all the legislative body. I am the finance minister. I am proposing that I want to allocate 100 crores for what? The defense this year. So some of you here, that is, assume yourself as a legislative body, some of you here may agree with that. Some of you may not be in agreement with that. Some of you might feel that it is less, or some of you might feel it is more. So therefore, some of you might introduce a motion. Motion means a proposal saying that you'll have to reduce this 100 crores. Say you'll have to reduce this to 80 crores. Probably you can take out 20 crores from that and you can use it for the purpose of education or for the purpose of improvement of health of the people. So it might be possible. So earlier, if you see in the government, in the Indian Council Act of 1892, in the Indian Council Act of 1892, they can discuss about the budget. If they're not happy about it, they can discuss. They can just stand up and they can just say it. Now what they can do? They can introduce a proposal formally to reduce the amount from say 100 crore to probably what is called as 80 crore. These are all what is called as cut motions, which I'll subsequently discuss when I take up the Indian Constitution. But now they are empowered to introduce what is called as these motions as well. They are allowed to ask supplementary questions also. So this is what I said, that they can bring in resolutions also. So now try to understand over a period of time, their functions is also improving. So now starting from 1861 now till 1909, just see what was the initial power that was given to them. Only they discuss the bills. Then in 1892, they can discuss about the budget. They discuss about the bills. They can discuss about the budget. What else they can do? And they can ask questions. Now what else they can do apart from that? In addition to that, they can pass resolutions on the budget, and they can also ask what is called as supplementary questions. So over a period of time, their functions started expanding. And there is also one important change that has happened in the Executive Council also. So till this point of time, after the portfolio system, we did not see any major change in the Executive Council. And now starting 1861 till this point of time, we have seen expansion in the Legislative Council, where the Indians were also part of it. And for the first time in the provincial council, there was a non-official majority. But for the first time in 1909, there was an inclusion of an Indian in the executive council also, very, very important. So when for the first time there was an inclusion of an Indian in the executive council, it is in the 1909 by the Indian Council Act of 1909. And who was first such executive member? It is Satyendra Prasad Sinha, who was also the law member. And which portfolio was given? Law portfolio, because for them this is the least important one. So they have given what is called as the law portfolio to him. Okay. So the law portfolio was given to Satyendra Prasad Sinha. So this has also been repeatedly asked in the examination. So when? 1909. Okay. Okay, so with that we are done with the Indian Council Act 1909. So if you have to draw important inferences yourself, I want every one of you to draw some inferences, not one specific point, but a broader inference about the Councils Act. So broadly, what is this Councils Act? Broadly, these Councils Act were trying to bring in reforms in the council, both in the executive council as well as in the legislative council. But broadly, the reforms are focused upon the legislative council. What else is the broader change that you have seen? Yes. Yes. Very good. It started to involve the Indians. That it tried to bring in more Indians, especially in the legislative council. When for the first time there was a non-official majority in the provincial council? 1909. But in the central legislative council, still there was official majority. Okay, it started to increase the Indian representation. As it is not only started to increase the representation in terms of the numbers, but has it also increased the functions of these members so that it becomes truly representative? So can anyone see how the functions have been increasing right from 1861 till 1909? Okay. No, supplementary questions came in 1909. In between, what happened in 1892? From discussing about the bills, then what happens? They can discuss about the budget and they can ask questions on public importance. Then they are allowed to pass a resolution on budget and also to ask what is called as supplementary questions. So gradually it has improved over a period of time. And then gradually the kind of representation also, initially it was only nomination, then an indirect election, and then probably it became what is called as direct election. But although in the direct election, it was one major flaw in that is the system of communal electorate. And therefore, Lord Minto came to be what is called as a father of communal electorate. So these are the major things you'll have to remember. And in addition to that, you should also understand for the first time, there was an inclusion of the Indian in the Executive Council also. And when did that happen? 1909. And who was the first such law member? It was Satyendra Prasad Sinha. Is it clear till this point of time? First, then I'll come to you. Yeah, yes.
After the company the board of court, where nominees of council, it's 1850
You mean to say board of control? Court of directors. The court of directors were whom? The court of directors were the company owners. So the company was itself taken up by the British government. So they would have given some compensation or whatever it is. Say for example, today in India there is a, can the government take up the private banks if they want to? Have they nationalized the private banks? In fact, during 1960s and 70s, a lot of private banks were nationalized. So what will happen to them when the private banks are nationalized? The government would have given some compensation. That is now happening in a very democratic manner. So at that time, we do not know way back in the at that point of time, but maybe some compensation would have been given to them. I'm not sure, but and that may not be very relevant to the exam also. But yes, the company is what? The company is a private company at that time, but it was looking into the British, the administrative affairs of the British India. But later the government itself has taken up this particular company and converted into an administrative structure. So therefore, they might be given some compensation. when they were taken up. It was through nominations at that point of time. Again, the governor general, the viceroy, and the governors. Okay, but there was no system of election and then nomination. So directly he picked. But later, what has happened? The viceroy and the governors are not picking it. So it was indirectly elected through certain bodies, and they recommended these names, and those names are nominated. That's why we say that there was an indirect election in 1892. Okay. Okay, so come to the next thing, that is the Government of India Act 1919 and the Government of India Act 1935. The next set of reforms. The Government of India Act 1919 and the Government of India Act 1935. So the Government of India Act 1919 is also called as the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. Again, Montagu was the Secretary of State and Chelmsford was the Viceroy, and therefore it came to be what is called as the Montagu-Chelmsford reform. And this is for the first time they tried to bring in a lot of changes with regard to the administrative structure in our country. Especially one area is where the relationship between the center and the states with regard to majorly their executive powers. So that was the major focus in the Government of India Act 1919. Now, what are the kind of changes that has happened between the center-state relationship, and what are the major changes that has brought in? We'll try to understand that one by one. So, if you see this, the responsible government in British India is the objective to be achieved by increasing association of Indians in every branch of government gradually. So, what is that they said as an objective? That we will increase the Indians in every branch of administration, not only in the legislative area, but also in the executive area. So, we'll see how the expansion is happening. But the most important area is that the demarcation of separate central and the provincial subjects. This is very, very important. This is one major change that was brought in by the Government of India Act 1919. Now you can relate this similar to that of what is called as in the present constitution, the Schedule 7. We discussed briefly about the Schedule 7 of the Constitution. Can you just think about what we discussed about the Schedule 7 of the Constitution? It brought in different subject matters for the central legislature and the provincial legislature, or today it brought in different subject matter for the parliament as well as the state legislature. So today, if you look into the Schedule 7 of the Constitution, how many lists is there? So what are the list? Union list. Okay, very good. Union list, which is also the list 1, and then state list is the list number 2, state list, and then you have what is called as a concurrent list. So this is a very detailed demarcation that has been done in the Constitution, but at that point of time it was not so detailed. But this is a starting where they try to divide the legislative subjects between the central legislature and the provincial legislature. Earlier also they had, but they now wanted to explicitly put it in the law as to what would be the items in the central legislature and what would be the items in the state legislature. So demarcation of separate central and the provincial subjects. Now whatever is the central subjects, then who will be able to make law here? The central legislature will be able to make laws here. And whatever is in the provincial subjects, the provinces will be able to make the law. Although the structure of government continue to be more centralized and unitary. What does this mean? Although they wanted to give some certain subject matters to the provinces, where the provinces can make law, but still the system continued to be what? Centralized and unitary. Why it is centralized and unitary? I'll come back to this particular area. Because here there was no decentralization. There was no decentralization of subject matters, but rather there was only devolution of subject matters. Now, what is the difference between decentralization and devolution? Which is giving more autonomy to the provinces or the provincial subjects? Decentralization. Decentralization means in the law you are explicitly putting it. And therefore, once you put it in the law explicitly, if at all you have to make the changes in the law, you will have to amend that particular law. Instead of amending that particular law, see, there are two ways. Suppose let us assume law 1 is there. Try to understand like this. Let us assume law 1. This law 1 is saying, okay, it is dividing the matter like this. It is dividing, this is the subject matter of central legislature. It is putting down subject matter of central legislature, 10 subject matters for the central legislature, and then for the state legislature, or so I'm not using the word state, let me use the word provincial legislature at that point of time. The provincial legislature, it is mentioning 5 subject matters, right? So this is law 1. Now in this case, what do you understand? This 10 subject matters, who will have the power to make laws? Central legislature. These 5 subject matters, who will have the power to make laws? Provincial legislature. Now, is it possible for the central legislature to make laws on these areas? Is it possible? Unless and until it is provided in the law, it is not possible, because the law itself is saying these are all your subject matters. Let us assume the law does not give the central legislature to make laws on these areas. That means who will have the exclusive power? Provincial. Can the central legislature take away these powers? If it is explicitly mentioned, it is not possible. That means this is an example of what is called as decentralization. The power is decentralized and it is given to whom? It is given to the provinces directly in the law. But however, in the Government of India Act 1919, they wanted to give some power to the provinces, but there was no decentralization. There was devolution by rules. Now, what does it mean by devolution by rules? Instead of law 1, let us assume law 2. Okay, the law 2 is saying that there are certain subject matters which are given to the center, or it is a central legislature which will have all the law making powers. All the subject matters belong to whom? To the center. But there is one more rule, or there is one more provision. And what is this provision is saying? This provision is saying, although all the law making powers belong to whom? The central legislature, but the viceroy can delegate. The viceroy by a rule can give some of the powers to the provincial legislature. From here, he may give some of the powers to the provincial legislature. This is law 2. That means in this law, all the powers are given to whom? The central legislature. But despite the powers are given to the central legislature, what the viceroy can do? The viceroy can devolve some of the powers to the provincial legislature. But yes, the viceroy has devolved some of the powers to the provincial legislature. Now, what is the problem with this law? There is no decentralization, because the viceroy at any time can take back the powers he has given to the provinces. But however, this is the beginning of what is called as decentralization. But there was no complete decentralization, because the powers that was given to the provinces were at the mercy of whom? At the mercy of the viceroy making the rules. So the viceroy, if he wants, he can take back the power. So therefore, in the Government of India Act 1919, what was there? It was only through devolution that the provincial legislature were given the powers. And who can devolve the powers to the provincial legislature? The viceroy can do that. Do you understand? So, but however, in 1935, there was decentralization. But in 1919, there was only what is called as devolution. Is that clear till this point of time? So, this is the most important thing. So, what are the powers that the viceroy had kept for himself? That is, what are the powers he has kept it for the central legislature? So these are all the areas they thought which is very important. So all the powers were given to the center, but the viceroy can devolve certain things to the provinces. But he did not devolve certain areas. He has kept it for himself. So what are the areas he has kept it for himself? He has kept it areas like defense. That means defense will be under the control of whom? The center. That is viceroy and his council. Similarly, the foreign affairs, who will have control over that? Center. Who will have communications? Center. The telegraph, post and all the communications will be in the center. Who will have control over the civil and criminal administration? The center will have control over all these things. But however, the viceroy has devolved certain powers to the states. And what are the powers he has given? One is what is called as public health, education, local government, agriculture, etc. So these powers has been devolved to the various provinces. But can these powers be taken back by the viceroy if he wants? Yes, because there was only what is called as devolution of powers. Is that clear? So first of all, try to understand that there was something which is called as devolution of powers. But the most important thing is the Government of India Act 1919 has also allowed for a system of what is called as diarchy. Now, what is the system of diarchy? Try to understand. I'll just explain this and then I'll go back to the slide. So it is the Government of India Act 1919 which has brought in a system of what is called as diarchy. How many of you heard about this diarchy? So what is the system of diarchy? Now, first of all, we have understood in the system of diarchy, even before I come to the system of diarchy, in the Government of India Act 1919, we have understood that there were certain central subjects which is controlled by the central executives, and there were certain provincial subjects. There were certain provincial subjects, right? There were certain provincial subjects here, central subjects, but the provincial subjects was by way of devolution. And what are the items that was devolved? So we have seen some examples. What are the items that was given? Like agriculture, like public health, education, these were given. Now, diarchy means, diarchy is a system where the provincial subjects were further divided. That means the provincial subjects were further divided. Whatever is given to the provinces, the provincial subjects were further divided. And how they were divided? Into reserved and transferred subjects. The provincial subjects are further divided into what? Reserved and transferred subjects. Now, what do you understand by the reserved subjects? Whatever is given to the provinces, some items were given to the provinces. In the provinces also try to understand that there is a Governor General and his executive. So the Governor General and his executive now try to understand that the reserved subjects were completely under the control of the governor in the provinces. But the transferred subjects were not under the control of the governor. Rather, he has given it to a responsible minister. Now try to understand, when was a direct election came in? 1909, the direct election has come in. So 1919 also you can understand that there was a system of direct election, but on the basis of what is called as limited adult franchise. That means now try to understand, this is the Governor Council. Now when I talk of the Governor Council, I am talking about the Executive Council. In the Governor Council, there were few members who are part of the British administration. So they were directly nominated. So let us assume the Governor Council had 4 to 5 members. We are not sure how many members. Suppose let us assume part of the members, let us assume X members were directly nominated by the British government. And plus there were Y members, let us assume these Y members were what? They were elected members. Now say for example, in every province there was a provincial legislative council, and there were members who were elected to the provincial legislative council, and from that provincial legislative council who was elected, somebody is appointed as a minister, and those who are appointed as a minister was part of what is called as the, here they are called as ministers. Because try to understand, in 1909 for the first time there was an Indian who was appointed to the Viceroy Executive Council, clear? And similarly, in 1919, certain Indians are also representing the Executive Council at the provinces also. So therefore, there were Indians who are considered to be ministers and others who are part of the Viceroy Council. Everybody is part of the Governor General Council, but some ministers, when I talk of ministers, specifically they are elected by indirect election and they are appointed as ministers. And these are all people who are nominated by the British government. So this is the Governor General Council at the provincial subject. Now try to understand the reserved subjects and the transferred subjects. While For all the subject matters in the provinces, for their implementation, who is responsible? The Governor General Council. But the reserved subject was under the control of the Governor General and the nominated members, while the transferred subjects are in the responsibility of the ministers. So this is how they have brought in the system, and this is basically the system of what is called as diarchy. Is that clear? Now you can ask me, sir, why the transferred subjects are given to the ministers? Because in the opinion of the British government, the transferred subjects are not so important for them. What is very important for them? The reserved subjects. Say, for example, for the Britishers, what is important? Revenue is important or health is important for them? Is it the health of the people important or the revenue important for them? Is it the industry important for them or is it the education important for them? So whatever is important for them, is it the law and order that is important or the development that is important for them? Law and order. So whatever is important for the Britishers, that was part of the reserved subject. Whatever is not so important for them, that was transferred to the ministers. You take care of it. So that is how they have demarcated this particular system. That means they're trying to show to the native Indians, we are making the system more representative. We are accommodating Indians in every part of government, including the executives. So therefore, we are giving the responsibility to the ministers to take care of education, ministers to take care of health. But unfortunately, the revenue is part of whom? Revenue is in the reserved subject. And for whatever is in the transferred subject, the revenue has to come from the reserved subject. But they are not giving the revenue. So the ministers were made responsible of some portfolio without having the actual revenue. So ultimately the system failed, but only to show to the people that we are bringing in reforms, we are accommodating the Indians. And if it is not performing better, the blame will be there upon the responsible minister. So therefore the system ultimately failed, the system of diarchy. Okay. But this is basically what is called as a system of diarchy. Is that clear to all of you? If a question comes in the examination, when was the system of diarchy introduced? When it was introduced? It was in 1919, and you should be able to understand what is this reserved list and what is this transferred list. Although you don't have to remember what is reserved and transferred, you just try to remember on what basis they have brought in this reserved and transferred list. Okay, now try to understand the system of diarchy was brought in. Okay, as a part of the devolution, I'll just come back to that. But as a part of this devolution, they have given not only given some subjects to the provinces, they also made the provinces to make budget for those things. So the provinces were empowered to make budgets also. And then finally, they have also introduced that in the provincial subjects were further divided into reserved and what is called as the transferred subjects. They have also brought in what is called as the reserved and the transferred subjects. Okay, so what are the reserved subjects? Reserved subjects are to be administered by the Governor Executive Council and not responsible. This is very important, and not responsible to the legislature. That is what is very important. What does it mean by in reserved areas to be administered by the Governor General, not responsible to the legislature? That means in these areas, the legislature will not be in a question to ask question. Because we've seen that over a period of time, there is a representative form of government. That means where they can ask questions in the legislature. They can ask supplementary questions. But in these areas, no questions can be asked. In which areas? In the reserved areas. But so what are the reserved areas in the provinces? Land revenue, police, electricity, industries, public service. These are all in what is called as reserved list. And then there are certain transferred subjects. What are the transferred subjects? To be administered by the responsible minister under the control of the governor and responsible to the legislature. That means in these areas, questions can be asked in the legislature and the minister has to give the response. And what are such area? Education, public health, industries, agriculture, local government, industries, but industrial dispute is reserved. Okay. So these are all the areas where the questions can be asked and responsible. So this is one major change, and this system came to be what is called as diarchy. And ultimately, the system of diarchy failed. And what could be the reason as to why the system of diarchy failed? Because in all these areas, the revenue has to come from where? The revenue has to come from Not from the center, because revenue itself is given to the states. The state at the province at the provincial level can collect the revenue. But revenue is part of which item? It is in the reserved list. So therefore, unless and until they reserve the revenue, until they release the revenue to these areas, they will not be able to function effectively. But whether they will release the revenue or not, it cannot be discussed and it cannot be questioned in the legislature. So therefore, the system ultimately came to be a failure. Okay. And in addition to that, what is the other major change? This is for the first time they introduced what is called as bicameralism in the central legislature. What do you understand by bicameralism? Two houses were brought in. Till that point of time, there was only one legislative council. But now, within the central legislative council, two houses were brought in. Today, in our parliamentary democracy, do we have two houses? Yes. What are the two houses? Upper house and the lower house. So this central legislative council was further divided, and what was their name? They're called as Council of States and what is called as a Central Legislative Assembly. This Council of State, today also it is called as a Council of State, which is similar to that of the Rajya Sabha. And this Central Legislative Council today is equivalent to that of the House of People or Lok Sabha. Okay. Now this last class, in this class, there will be a lot of facts. You will have to remember that there is no other way. But after this, you don't have to remember a lot of facts. You'll have to understand. But here, yes, there's a lot of facts. Although if you read your books, it will be only facts. I'm trying to link these facts through some narration. So therefore, you can retain these information. Okay. And the majority of these members were elected by what is called as direct election. But however, when the direct election came, 1909, but now the system of direct election was further carried forward, and still they had what is called as direct election. In fact, in both the houses. Here also again there was a system of limited adult franchise, but it was a gradual increment over what it was earlier in 1909. Okay, so few more people were given the right to vote. Okay, so this is the basic understanding you should have here also. So when for the first time bicameralism was introduced? 1919. Try to remember that. Okay. So in addition to that, few more things. So here also there was limited adult franchise based on property, tax, education, and all those things. And the most important thing is here they extended the principle of communal electorate. Who was the father of communal electorate in India? Lord Minto, who was the father of communal electorate. He introduced a system of communal electorate only for the Muslims. What was introduced for the Muslims was further expanded to many other sections of the society by the government of India Act 1919. And to whom it has been extended? It has been extended to Sikhs, Indian Christians, Anglo-Indians, Europeans, to all these categories of people it was extended. That means they are further sowing the seeds of what is called as divide and rule in our country, which was not liked by the Indian political parties, but yes, they have still expanded. And minimum 3 members to be part of the Viceroy Executive Council. So initially, how many members was there? 1 member in 1909, the law member, which was further extended to 3 members. So there was expansion in the Viceroy Executive Council also. And it provided for establishment of what is called as Public Service Commission. That is Provincial Public Service Commission as well as the Central Public Service Commission. And finally, it was established in 1926, but the law provides for it, 1919 Act. Which is now what is also called as what? The State Public Service Commission and the Union Public Service Commission. So what is the genesis of these Public Service Commission? The Government of India Act 1919. Although, now try to understand, the open competitive system of examination was recognized way back in 1861, even before that in 1853. But however, as an institution, it came in 1919. That is the Government of India Act 1919. And also it created a new office of High Commissioner. This office of High Commissioner segregated some of the functions from the Secretary of State. Ultimately, who is responsible for the Indian administration? Secretary of State. To relieve the burden of the Secretary of State, a new office was created, what is called as Office of the High Commissioner. And some of the functions was taken away from the Secretary of State and it was given in the hands of the Office of the High Commissioner. Now, what were the functions that was given in the office of the High Commissioner? Say, for example, assume that this is today equivalent to that of the ambassador of India representing some other country, or the High Commissioner of India representing some other country. Now, do you know what is their major function today if somebody is an Indian ambassador to some other country or a High Commissioner? And what is the difference between ambassador and High Commissioner? In certain countries, we call them as ambassador. In certain countries, we call them as what is called as High Commissioner. Very good. In British Commonwealth countries, they are normally designated as High Commissioners. Whereas in other countries, they are considered to be what is called as ambassadors. Anyways, now what is their primary role? What do you think? Advocating Indian interests, negotiating various deals, probably taking care of the Indians in those countries. If the Indian students are there for higher education and all those things, taking care of their interest, or any other dispute between India and that particular country, they have to negotiate all those things, especially trade deals and all those things. So here, if you see the High Commissioner, majorly they will take into India's trade with foreign countries. The Indian students in UK are to be taken care by the High Commissioner, which are all earlier the duty of the Secretary of State. So now the Secretary of State is relieved of all those things, and who is going to take care of all those things? The High Commissioner. And the High Commissioner will be appointed by the British Crown, but on the recommendation of the Secretary of State. The Secretary of the State is one who will recommend, but otherwise he is not responsible and accountable, or he will not report to the Secretary of State. He will directly report to whom? He will directly report to the British Crown. Okay, so this is how the systems were brought in. And then there was a provision for appointment of a statutory commission after 10 years after this law comes into force. That means this is a gradual reform that they have brought in. So they wanted to see how this reform that they are bringing in 1919 is getting implemented and what kind of changes it is bringing in. And they also wanted to bring in some changes after 10 years. And to bring some changes after 10 years after the implementation of this particular law, they wanted to appoint a commission to study the Government of India Act 1919. And based on the recommendation of that particular commission, they will bring in what is called as further reforms. And you know what commission, which commission was appointed to study the Government of India Act? It was a Simon Commission. And when was the Simon Commission appointed? It was appointed in 1927. And in fact, even before 10 years, the Simon Commission was appointed because the Britishers wanted to bring in more reforms. And there was a major opposition to the Simon Commission. Do you know what was the major, why was the major opposition? In fact, the Simon Commission had no Indian representatives, and that's why there was a major opposition in the form of what is called as Go Back Simon. Because these reforms are to be brought in for the Indians and for the administration of the British India, but there was no Indian representatives in that. So therefore, it was a complete white commission. So therefore, there was opposition to all those things. I think students who read already their modern history are able to easily connect to most of the things that I'm discussing, but I'm not going it from a history subject, strictly in the form of constitutional reforms. That is my domain, okay? So is it clear to all of you till this point of time? Very, very important, Government of India Act 1919. Many times questions have come from this particular area. So let us take a moment to just recollect what has happened in the Government of India Act 1919. And then I'll go forward to what is called as the Government of India Act 1935. So what are the major changes that has brought in the Government of India Act 1919? Some significant thing. Broadly, even before going to that, broadly, the difference between the Councils Act and the Government of India Act 1919 or 1935 also is that they are not primarily focused upon only the reforms in the council, but they are involved in the broader reforms of governance, majorly the relationship between the center and the state. And to that extent, what are the major changes? The first, their stated objective is that they wanted to increase the association of native Indians in all the areas, not only in the legislative area, but also in the executive areas. And have they done that? Yes. They also expanded what is called as the Executive Council. So in the Executive Council, how many Indians were there? 3 Indians were there. And most importantly, they tried to devolve certain powers to the provinces. But however, it was not decentralization, it was only what? Devolution. And what is the disadvantage of devolution? That the Viceroy can take back this, because ultimate authority to give the power and to take the power is the Viceroy himself. But however, the Viceroy can devolve the powers to the provinces. But one major flaw as per the critics is that whatever the power they have given to the provinces is that they have brought in a system of what is called as diarchy. And what is the system of diarchy? That whatever powers that has been given to the provinces is further divided into what is called as reserved list and transferred list. So can anyone explain me what is the difference between reserved and transferred list? Very good. So not only that, in addition to that, as you said, finally, that the governors and the council, they are not accountable to the legislature when it comes to the reserved list. But when it comes to the transfer list, they are accountable. But why this system ultimately failed? The system ultimately failed because of lack of finances. On the one hand, you are giving the power without any finances, so it is not going to work. On the other hand, you have the finances without any accountability. So that system also did not work well. But this is ultimately to show that the Britishers were involving the Indians in every branch of administration. But however, it did not work out well. And apart from that, they also increased or expanded the system of communal electorate, which was only to the Muslims. And further, they have expanded it to the other areas. And they extended the system of direct election also, but with limited adult franchise. For the first time, bicameralism was brought in. So these are all important changes, and then they have brought in an office of High Commissioner, they have brought in the Public Service Commission. So all these changes has been brought in. Is it clear till this point of time? So is it clear as to what is the Government of India Act 1858, and then subsequently all the three Councils Act 1861, 1892, 1909? Who is considered to be the father of communal electorate? And why is called as a father of communal electorate? Can anyone explain me the system of communal electorate? Explain as to what is this separate electorate is. Very good. Not only the Muslim candidates can contest the election, and only who can vote for the elections? Only the Muslims, eligible Muslims, limited adult franchise, they will be eligible to vote. Now, when was the system of indirect election brought in? Although the legal mention was avoided. And what was used instead of the indirect election? Nomination. But nomination happened in 1861 also. But what is the difference between nomination in 1861 and in 1892? So the local bodies chosen the representative, and the nomination was restricted only to those people chosen by the local bodies or by the provincial legislature. But before that, it was completely the prerogative of the governors and the viceroy. Okay. So try to remember all those things. So what I'll do is, I think some of the students has given the request. So I'll give you 5 minutes break now. Do you want the break? Some of the students have told, I think they wanted a break, or you don't want the break. How many of you need a break? You don't need? If you want, I'll give you 5 minutes break, or otherwise I'll continue. Some students have asked it seems that if possible to give 5 minutes break in between. Not required? Okay. Shall I proceed? Okay, if you want, you can take the break. Okay, but I'll continue with the class. Okay, you'll have to watch. You'll have to watch. I cannot wait for you for 5 more minutes. So if you want to take a break, if you want to go out for certain reason, you don't have to ask me. This is not school or college. At any time, without disturbing the class, with the proper discipline, you can walk out and you can come back and you can join the class. All right, shall I move forward? Okay, so let us move to the next act, that is the Government of India Act 1935. Okay, so before that, this was one question that was asked in the UPSC examination. Look into this particular question. The Montagu-Chelmsford proposals were related to what? That is basically the Government of India Act 1919 is related to what? It is nowhere related to the social reforms. It is nowhere related to the educational reforms. It is nowhere related to the police. What it is basically? Constitutional reforms, the broader reforms as to how the British India is to be administered. So that is, now don't think that Sir has not used the word constitutional reforms. So basically, what was the Constitution of India at that point of time? It was the Government of India Act 1919, and then it is the Government of India Act 1935. Okay. Okay, so this is another question. Please look into this particular question. See how UPSC is asking the question. You should be in a position to solve these questions based on the discussion. In the context of Indian history, the principle of diarchy refers to. Diarchy was introduced when? 1919. So division of central legislature into two houses? No. Introduction of double government, that is central and state government? No. Although there was devolution of powers, but double government was introduced way back, not in the Government of India Act 1919. Having two sets of rulers, one in London and other in Delhi. There is no such provision. It is a complete distractor. Okay. Division of the subjects delegated to the provinces into two categories. Is it? And what are the two categories of subjects? Reserved and transferred. And what was a reserved subject? What was kept as reserved subject? The important areas for the Britishers, they were reserved subjects, as the name reserved. And what are the transferred subject? Whatever is not important, they transferred it to the responsible minister and made them responsible to the legislature. Okay, now come to the next tag, that is the Government of India Act 1935. So after the Simon Commission was appointed, so based on the recommendation of the Simon Commission, this reform was brought in. This law was enacted by the British Parliament, and thereby it came to be what is called as the Government of India Act 1935. So now let us try to understand some of the provisions of the Government of India Act 1935. So again, Government of India Act 1935 is involving the broader reforms in the governance. It is not looking into any minor areas, but broader reforms, including the center-state relationship in the administrative structure, public service commission, all those things, including the legislative council, including the executive council, everything was part of it. So it was not focusing only on the councils. The objective is again to bring responsible and representative form of government associating Indians in the different branches. What are the significant provisions? First and foremost is it brought in what is called as an All India Federation. What does it mean by an All India Federation? Now, this is many times asked in the UPSC examination, when for the first time the federation was brought in or provided in the in which act during the British rule? In which act it was for the first time mentioned? It was mentioned only in the Government of India Act 1935, not in Government of India Act 1919. But in the Government of India Act 1919, were there some powers to the provinces? Yes, but it was not a federation. It was only by devolution. Now, what is devolution? That means the power can be taken back at any time. So this is like law number 1 that I discussed. I discussed two laws, law 1 and law 2. What is law number 1? In the law number 1, the power is granted by the law itself. So therefore, the center cannot do anything with the powers of the state. So this is something like that. So directly, who is giving the power to the provinces? It is not, the provinces are not getting the power from the viceroy, but from where the power is coming? The power is coming directly from the law. So therefore, for the first time, the federation was provided by which act? It was by the Government of India Act 1935. Is that clear? But whereas in 1919, it was only by way of what is called as devolution. So because students read that in the 1919 itself, the power was given to the provinces, they think that the federation has provided in 1919 itself. No. The federation for the first time provided when? Only by the Government of India Act 1935. Very, very important area. Okay. So this federation would comprises of what? The British provinces and the princely states. So all these things will be part of the federation. That's the vision of this particular law. Whether it become a reality or not, that's a question mark. Okay. So, but the law has provided for what is called as an All India Federation. But is it a reality? Has it ever become a reality, this All India Federation? It has not become a reality. That means the Government of India Act 1935, although it has provided for an All India Federation, but did this become did practically the federation was established? Now, why do you think it was? Yes, it was not established. Why do you think it was not established? Because the princely states were not accepting this. Because as per the provision, I think a majority of the princely states have to accept to this. But most of the princely states at that point of time has not accepted to this idea of what is called as an All India Federation. So before I proceed further, you should also have an idea as to what is a British province and what is a princely state. What is the difference between a British province and a princely state? Can anyone tell me if you know the answer?
And the princely states are in the.
Can you elaborate further? It is right, but more precise answer.
These states were not directly under the British one because they were rulers. They were not in the British state.
You mean to say that the British provinces and the princely states both were under the control of the British monarch, under the British crown, but the princely states were having a lot of internal autonomy, which was not the case in case of the provinces. Yes, because in case of the princely states, there are no elected government. It was the rulers who were carrying out the administration, but they have ultimately submitted to the British crown. They are protected by the British crown, but the British government or the Britishers will not interfere with the internal administration of the princely states. Largely, they are ruled by the kings or the whoever is the ruler there. Can you give me an example of princely states? Very good. Hyderabad, Bikaner, Awadh. Although in case of Awadh, it later became part of certain provinces. Some of the princely states, larger princely states like Junagadh, Jammu and Kashmir, Hyderabad, Bikaner, yes. So these are all some of the provinces. In fact, we had more than 500 princely states. Sorry, not provinces, princely states. But most of the princely states are not happy with this. And Travancore in the south. So these are all some of the provinces. So they did not join it because joining the federation means that they thought that they have to give away their autonomy. And it will become a more democratic system of administration. They are not willing to give up their power. So therefore, it did not become a reality, but the act provided for it. Okay. All right. So this is one important reform that has been brought in, but it never become reality, but the act provided for it. And this act also directly provided for what is called as federal, provincial and the concurrent list, which is similar to that of what today? The 7th schedule in the constitution. So while the starting of this happened in the Government of India Act 1919, but the federalism was established or it provided for in Government of India Act 1935. So federalism is similar to that of the union list, provincial list is similar to that of the state list, whereas the concurrent list is equal to that of the concurrent list, which is there in the 7th schedule. But however, despite all those things, this is again very important. The residuary powers was given to the Viceroy. What do you understand by the residuary powers? Say, for example, whatever is there in the federal list, who will have the power to make laws? The federal legislature or the central legislature. Whatever is in the provincial list, who will have the power to make laws? The respective provincial legislature. And whatever is there in the concurrent list, who will have the power to make laws? Both the central as well as the provincial legislature. But in case of conflict, the law made by the provincial central legislature will prevail. But suppose if a subject matter is not mentioned in any of the three lists, then who will have the power to make laws in those areas? The Viceroy will have the power to make laws. That's basically what is called as the residuary powers. Now, today in the present Constitution of India also, there is a residuary power. We have union list, we have state list, we have concurrent list. But suppose if a subject matter is not mentioned in any of these three lists, suddenly a law has to be made on a particular subject matter, but that is not falling under any of these three domains, then the residuary power is given to whom under the Constitution of India? It is given to whom? Union means what? Union? You have to say union legislature. If you say union, that does not make any sense. Is it union executive or is it union legislature? So there's a confusion. So therefore, who is given the power to make laws on the residuary matters presently? It is a union legislature, or you can say parliament is having the power to do that. But in the Government of India Act 1935, who is giving the power? Who is given the power? The Viceroy. In fact, this was asked in one of the years in the preliminary examination. As per the Government of India Act 1935, who was given the residuary powers of lawmaking? Who was given the residuary powers of lawmaking? It was the Viceroy. And then this act, based on the recommendation of the Simon Commission again, they have given complete provincial autonomy, and to give provincial autonomy, they have to do with a system of diarchy. Because system of diarchy means, on the one hand, you are saying that we have an elected government, but that elected government is not having control over the reserved list or the reserved items. That doesn't give autonomy to the provinces to carry out good governance in the provinces. So the Simon Commission was also very critical of the system of diarchy. So therefore, the system of diarchy was done away with in the provinces. Okay, so abolition of diarchy has happened here. But however, in the center, they continued with the diarchy in the Government of India Act 1935. But in the provinces, they have done away with. And the responsible ministers were in charge of various portfolios. In fact, there was no distinction between reserved and transferred items. So who was in charge of all the items? It was the responsible ministers. That means who are responsible to the legislature. So therefore, the system also became very representative in character. And then the governor to carry out administration under the directions of Viceroy in the absence of the elected government. Now that means today try to understand this was similar to the system of the president rule. Similar to that of the president rule today in the present constitution. So ultimately, who is supposed to carry out the administration in the provinces? The elected government under the overall supervision of the governor. So this is during when there is an elected government. But when there is no elected government, then who will carry out the administration? The governors through the direction of the Viceroy. So this provision was also there as a part of the Government of India Act 1935. All right, so these are all some major changes that has been brought in, but I think there are still a little bit reforms. So what was the further things? Diarchy was introduced in the center. Bicameralism was further expanded. So not only to the central legislature, but also to the provinces. Now this is an area you should not confuse. When was bicameralism brought into the central legislature? 1919. But the bicameralism was further expanded to the provinces in addition to the central legislature by the Government of India Act 1935. Okay. So this is also done. And then the direct election to most of the members. But when was direct election brought in for the first time? It is 1909. Don't get confused. 1909. It further was expanded. 1919. Further expanded in 1935. When I say further expanded means the limited adult franchise was gradually getting increased. Okay. But in 1935 also it was only limited adult franchise. And then extension of separate electorate. So further extension of separate electorate. In 1909, who was for whom the separate electorate was introduced? Only to the Muslims. In 1919, that was further extended to whom? To the Sikhs, Indian Christians, Anglo-Indians, Europeans, which was further extended to the depressed classes also by the Government of India Act 1935. Depressed classes means to the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. Not only on the basis of religion, now they are trying to extend it on the basis of caste also. Okay, so in fact, this was very much opposed by Gandhiji and others, but anyways, they have further extended not only to the depressed classes, to the women's, to the laborers. There was class division also, gender division also, caste division also. So all these things, so complete divide and rule, which the Indians were not basically happy. And then subsequently, there was an establishment of Federal Public Service Commission. That means earlier the Central Public Service Commission was renamed as Federal Public Service Commission. And then Provincial Legislative Commission. In addition to that, they provided for what is called as Joint Public Service Commission. So this is a new thing. What do you understand by Joint Public Service Commission? A same Public Service Commission for two or more provinces. They are considered to be what is called as Joint Public Service Commission. Today, do you think that we have all these provisions under the Constitution? Do we have we carried forward this particular legacy today? So under Article 315 of the Constitution, we have just renamed this. Federal Public Service Commission in the Constitution of India is renamed as Union Public Service Commission, and the Provincial Public Service Commission as the State Public Service Commission. What about this Joint Public Service Commission? Do you have the provision in the Constitution today? There is no Joint Public Service Commission. In 1960s, there was a Joint Public Service Commission for both state of Haryana and Punjab. When Haryana was separated from the state of Punjab, there existed a Joint Public Service Commission. Although today we do not have it, because subsequently the Haryana has established its own state public service commission. So is there a provision for joint public service commission in the constitution? Yes or no? It should be there. So based on the logic, if you go with whatever I say, is it there? Of course it is there. But my question is the Joint Public Service Commission a constitutional body? Extra constitutional. Is it a constitutional body? My question is only, is it a constitutional body? Try to answer to that particular question. Yes or no? How many of you think it's a constitutional body? It is not a constitutional body. Okay. So Joint Public Service Commission is not a constitutional body. If you look into the constitution, under Article 315 of the constitution, there can be an union public service commission at the union level. Every state can establish a state public service commission. But if you look into Article 315, while these things are directly established by Article 315, but if you read Article 315 of the Constitution, Article 315 of the Constitution is saying that if at all 2 or more states wanted to have a joint public service commission, then the Parliament can make a law. And by that law, they can establish what is called as a joint public service commission. So therefore, what is the status of joint public service commission? The joint public service commission is a statutory body, if at all, if it is established. It is not a constitutional body. So therefore, the joint public service commission is neither a constitutional body nor an extra constitutional body. It is what type of body? It is a statutory body. Is that clear? So is there a provision for a joint public service commission? Yes, but it is not a constitutional body if it is established. It can be established only by a law that is passed by the Parliament. So therefore, what will be the status of such a body? It is a statutory body, but right now we do not have any joint public service commission. In 1960, yes, a joint public service commission was created by an act of Parliament. But today it is not the case. Okay, it should be clear about all those things. But from where you have taken all these things? From the Government of India Act 1935. So therefore, what are the major provisions of the Government of India Act 1935? First of all, the All India Federation. Second, diarchy was abolished in the provinces. So therefore, provincial autonomy is an important feature. Then bicameralism was introduced in the provinces also, and of course we have carried forward to the center also. And what are the other things? Public Service Commission, Federal Public Service Commission, as well as the State Public Service, that is the Provincial Public Service Commission. What else? Okay, these are all positive things. So do we have all these provisions in the present constitution today? Are we a federation today? Are we providing for states autonomy? Are we providing for Public Service Commission? Are we providing for bicameralism in the center and the states? Yes, if the states want to have bicameralism, they can have it as per the constitution. Yes, while these things are positively influencing the constitution of India, but there are certain things we have also done negatively, because it was there in Government of India Act 1935. We don't want to have that. So don't always think that there will only be a positive influence. Something can also be negatively influencing, so that we are not having it. So can you think of something? Separate electorate we have done away with. Instead of separate electorate, we understood the problem of separate electorate. Instead of that, we have brought in a system of reservation. And separate electorate was majorly based on the basis of religion. But our reservation is not on the basis of religion, it is on the basis of caste. And that too only for the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. Now we are extending that even to the women also, after the 106th Constitutional Amendment Act. So therefore, some certain things negatively also. What else is the negative influence? Very good. Limited adult franchise we are done away with. We have brought in what is called as universal adult franchise. Anything else that you can think of? We have not given the powers to the viceroy, where rather we have given the power to the Parliament, the residuary powers. So make the system more responsible in character, because ultimately in a parliamentary democracy, the power has to be in the legislature. So these are all some things that we wanted to change from the Government of India Act 1935 also. All right, so let me see that if you have any other thing apart from this. I think we have almost covered the important provisions of the Government of India Act 1935. So before I complete the Government of India Act 1935, what are the criticism to the Government of India Act 1935? One is the federal scheme never materialized, although it provided for, and majorly because why it did not materialize? Because of the opposition from the princely states. The Governor General was given a lot of overriding powers. What type of here the Governor General means the Viceroy. Viceroy is given a lot of overriding powers. First of all, he was given the veto powers with regard to the bills by the legislature. He was given ordinance making power. He was given the residuary powers. So a lot of overriding powers. On the one hand, you are saying that the objective of this particular Government of India Act 1935 is to make the system more representative in character. But on the other hand, you are giving a lot of powers in the hands of the Viceroy. So therefore, that was critical. Weak provincial authority, especially in financial powers. Although some power has been given, lot of financial powers has not been granted. And without finances, for them to carry out good administration is not possible. So therefore, that was again a criticism. And then, of course, an emergency powers were given in the hands of the Viceroy again. So these are all some of the criticism of this particular act. Now, what type of question can come? So please take down a question. I'll give two questions. Try to write answers to both the questions. Okay. So first, write down first question. To what extent? To what extent? To what extent do you think? To what extent do you think the Government of India Act 1935? To what extent do you think the Government of India Act 1935 influenced the Constitution of India? To what extent do you think the Government of India Act 1935 influenced the Constitution of India? I hope the question is clear. That means what is the influence of the Government of India Act 1935 in the present Constitution? Now, how do you approach this particular question? Can anyone tell me how? Just take a moment, think about it. I'm not discussing the entire structure because I wanted you to write the answer first. But in the later, when I have covered substantial area, I'll also discuss few questions depending upon the time limit. But I think you might know that after the class is over, we have, I think, 4 to 5 classes until you discuss about the question. So where I'll discuss about it. But in between also I'll do it depending upon the time that you have got in hand. So anyone who wanted to discuss what is this question is about, or how would you approach this question? So basically, very good. So basically, what is the essence of this particular question? Basically, the essence of this particular question is you'll have to bring out some provisions in the Indian Constitution where you can relate that to the Government of India Act 1935. And to that extent, you can say, yes, this is positively, but sometimes negatively also you can say. Because we wanted to avoid some things because of our learnings from the Government of India Act 1935, we avoided these things in the Indian Constitution. So that can also be the other side. So both the areas you can present it. Okay, not necessarily only those things which is there. Most of the students will do only that also. How would you outsmart the other students? You'll also say because of our learnings, we don't want to have that in the Indian Constitution. So to that extent also it has influenced, because our question is to what extent it has influenced the present Constitution. Take down one more question. How far do you think? How far do you think? How far do you think? This is even difficult question than the first question. Okay. How far do you think the crown rule? How far do you think the crown rule has influenced the present Constitution of India? How far do you think that the crown rule has influenced the present Constitution of India? It's a very broader question. So here it is very difficult for you because you will have a lot of points. So the students, if you are writing the answers, the immature answer is you start explaining whatever is there in the in the Indian Council Act 1861, Indian Council Act 1892, then 1909, then 1919, then 1935. That means you need 1 hour to write the answer, but you do not have 1 hour. How much time you have got? You have got less than 10 minutes. It's a 10 marker question. That means you got 7 minutes in hand. So therefore, that is why it is very important to know the significance that we have learned. So mostly only the significance should be part of your answer. Okay. Any way that you will write, but I don't want you to write each and every provision of the act. That is not the way that you will write. You can draw the major inferences from every act, how gradual developments have happened, and finally you will also arrive at how now that is there in the Constitution of India. Or one simplest way of writing this answer is broadly you can take 3 Councils Act and major things that you can draw. Only the important thing in the 3 Councils Act is gradually it has allowed for a system of increase in representation. So that's the major essence of the Councils Act, increase in representation in the Legislative Council. And that was further carried forward in the Government of India Act 1919 and 1935 also. And ultimately from 1935 you can go to what is called as, so if you take 3 Councils Act, the only thing is increase in representation, not more than that. Increase in representation of the Indians, and that is the non-officials, and also allowing them to ask questions. And then you come to Government of India Act 1919. What was a major thing in the Government of India Act 1919? That's the genesis of devolution, but further it became federation in 1935. And then further everything from the Government of India Act 1935, and then you can go for the answer. So don't keep writing whatever is there in the Council Act, because whatever has happened, it has finally come to in which stage? The Government of India Act 1935. So it is largely from the Government of India Act 1935. But because the question is asking the entire Crown Rule, you should also touch upon the Councils Act as a part of your answer. All right. So try to write answers to both the questions if possible. At least try to write answer to one of the question. So even if you can write answer to one of the question, if at all any question can be asked from this particular area in the mains examination, that is also covered. All right. So with that, we are left with only one more act, that is the Indian Independence Act. Okay, shall we move forward to the Indian Independence Act? Can I have a better response? Okay. So if I also start talking like you, then you will not hear what I am saying. Okay. So try to give a better response so that I will also motivated to discuss further. Okay. So please come to the next thing. That is the Indian Independence Act. So what is this Indian Independence Act? The Indian Independence Act has not done anything extra. That means it has had no impact upon the governance mechanism. It just gave independence to India. That is why I said that even after independence, India was governed based on what? India was still governed based on the Government of India Act 1935 till the time it had its own constitution. But certain things probably you may know. This act officially ended the British rule and declared India as an independent and a sovereign state from 15th August 1947. In fact, to say sovereign, but still it was only recognized as what is called as a dominion. So what do you mean by a dominion state? That means a dominion state is sovereign in terms of its internal as well as in external affairs. But however, it has to still recognize the British crown as a nominal head. Okay, so that is the understanding you should have. So for namesake, still it is a British crown. The partition of British, and then this Government of India Act Indian Independence Act 1947, it allowed as a part of this particular act, one of the important provision, major provision of this particular act, it allowed to have multiple states. If India wanted to be a separate state, it can be a separate state. It allowed Pakistan to be a separate state. It allowed even the princely states to be a separate state if they want to be a separate state, or either to join with India and Pakistan. So therefore, it allowed for creation of multiple states. And in fact, most of the princely states voluntarily they came and joined with India at the time of the partition, except for 3 princely states. Do you know what are the 3 princely states that did not join with India? It was Hyderabad, Jammu and Kashmir, and Junagadh. But in fact, all the three princely states later came as a part of India by one way or the other. They also came, which I'll discuss when I discuss the union and its territories. Okay. So this is another important provision. The princely states were free to join. And the act also empowered, this is very important, the act also empowered the respective countries, that is India, Pakistan, or any princely state for that particular matter, to have their own constituent assembly. And not only they have their own constituent assembly, that constituent assembly would be a sovereign body to draft their constitution. This is very, very important. What do you mean by a sovereign body? That is a supreme authority to draft their constitution once there will be such a body. So accordingly, there were only two countries, that is India and Pakistan, and they had their respective constituent assembly to draft their constitution. But India still would be considered to be a dominion to be administered as per the Government of India Act 1935 till their respective constitution is drafted. So that means, that is why I say, although despite independence, based on which act India was governed, 1935, till the time the Constituent Assembly drafted the constitution. The Constituent Assembly was established somewhere in June 1946, which I'll subsequently discuss. If time permits, I'll discuss today, or otherwise I'll do it in the next class. In June 1946, the Constituent Assembly was established. Do you know when was the Constituent Assembly met for the first time? Though it is established in June 1946. 14th? Where did you read this? No, 14th August 1947. When did it meet for the first time? It met for the first time on 9th December 1946. Only on 9th December 1946 it met for the first time. And then an interim president was chosen. Why I am asking this particular question is, these have been asked in the prelims examination, and an interim president was chosen. Who was the interim president of the Constituent Assembly? And then on 11th December 1946, there was a regular president. So who was the interim president when they met on 9th December 1946? Who was the interim president of the Constituent Assembly? This was once asked in the prelims examination. Lord? No, not Mountbatten. So Mountbatten was the last Governor General of India from the Britishers. But who was the last Governor General of India? Very good. That was also asked in the prelims examination. It was C. Rajagopalachari, who was also the first Indian who was to be appointed. But after independence, Mountbatten continued to be the Governor General of India. But he is a Governor General. I am talking about the Constituent Assembly. In the Constituent Assembly, when I say president, he is similar to that of what? He is similar to that of the Speaker today. The Speaker today is called as the President of the Constituent Assembly at that point of time. Dr. Rajendra Prasad was the permanent president of the Constituent Assembly. I am talking about the interim president. Before Rajendra Prasad, Dr. Rajendra Prasad was elected. Dr. Sachidananda Sinha. Okay, it is not Satyendra Prasad. Okay, so who was the interim president, who was elected on 9th December. On 11th December 1946, when they met for the second time, the new president was elected, who is none but that Dr. Rajendra Prasad, who later, when the constitution was adopted and the constitution came into force, was also elected as the president of India. So before that, he was what? He was the president of the Constituent Assembly. So don't confuse about all those things. Okay, so they met for the first time in 9th December 1946. And do you know how much time they took to draft the Constitution of India? They almost took 2 years, 11 months and 18 days. So approximately you can keep it 3 years. But it is not that they met all the 3 years. They were met only, I think, hardly somewhere around some 200 days. So where they were discussed and they have drafted the entire constitution. But a lot of discussions have happened and a lot of rework has done on the drafting. And then finally, they drafted the constitution. Anyways, that I'll discuss when I discuss the Constituent Assembly more. So the point that I've discussed all those things is that till the time this constitution is drafted, India is to be administered based on what? It is based on the Government of India Act 1935. So for time being, you just remember this. And whatever fact that I said, please try to note it down, because even if you note it down, if you revise, that will help you to attend the questions in case if those questions are repeated. The act abolished the office of Viceroy and replaced them with the Governor General. So in fact, the Viceroy was replaced with Governor General, and who was a Governor General after this? It was Lord Mountbatten. And then subsequently, who became the Governor General? It was C. Rajagopalachari. So, and the Governor General was to be appointed by the British Crown, but on the advice of whom? On the advice of the Dominion Cabinet, not on the British Cabinet, on the advice of the Indian Dominion Cabinet. The act deprived the British Crown of the veto powers to the bills passed by the Dominion legislature, but transferred it to the Governor General of India. That means who is going to give the assent to the bills passed by the Dominion legislature? It has a Governor General. That means who will have the veto powers? It was Lord Mountbatten who is going to have the veto powers, or anyone who is the Governor General of India. But as all these things are till the time we have our own constitution. Okay, so this is as per the Indian Independence Act 1947. The act designated the Governor General of India and the governors of the provinces as the respective constitutional heads. And this we have carried forward in the constitution also. Okay, so instead of the Governor General of India, we have the President. Instead of the governors of the provinces, we have the governors of the states, who are the respective constitutional heads. Okay, so these are the major provisions. The Indian Independence Act is not very important, but you try to have an understanding of these provisions. Questions are more likely to come from the Government of India Act 1919 and 1935 for your prelims, but for your mains, more likely from the overall development or from the Government of India Act 1935. So please come to this question. In the federation established by the Government of India Act 1935, the residuary powers were given to whom? Although the appropriate thing is Viceroy, but if the Viceroy is not there, you can do that, because here the most thing is the Governor General. That means Governor General of India. Okay, so the system of diarchy was introduced by the Britishers in which one? 1919 or 1935? 1919 is when the system of diarchy was introduced. 1919. Okay, so it is 1919. It is option C. Sorry. What is the answer? It is B, because the princely states had an option either to join India or Pakistan, or they can remain independent. Okay, so here it is saying it cannot remain independent. So the answer is option B. I think we're done with the questions. If you want more questions, I'll do it later if you have the time. But at least try to revise whatever is given in the class. That would be more than sufficient. For this area, we have done very comprehensively. Okay, even if you do all those things, I'm sure that you can get that 1 or 2 questions definitely right. You will be able to write the mains answer also. Okay, so that is almost done. So let us take a couple of minutes to see what you have done. So from the very beginning of the class, what you have covered, because now we are going to enter into a new topic. Only a very small topic is pending, Constituent Assembly, which may take me maybe an half an hour or maybe 20-25 minutes to cover that particular topic. Once we are done with that particular topic, then we are going to what is called as the preamble. Now, once we start the preamble, then there is no stopping. Then we'll go union and its territories, then citizenship, then fundamental rights, fundamental DPSP, fundamental duties. Then I'll do the executives. When I do the executives, I'll do the entire executives. I'll do the president, and then once I do the president, vice president, the prime minister and the council of ministers, I'll just make a comparison with the state executives also, governor. So I'll not do as if it is in your Lakshmikant book or whatever book you are following. I'll do it in my own way, because I know this is a way that you can retain the information better. And then when I do the legislature, I'll do the union legislature as well as the state legislature. When I do the judiciary, I'll do the entire judiciary. And then after that, I'll do the center-state relationship, then the local bodies, then the constitutional bodies, statutory bodies and all those things, and then the representation of people act, and then ultimately your polity will come to an end, which will take me at least another 25 classes as we'll proceed further. It's a long way to go. But however, the most important thing is if you keep revising on a daily basis, things are going to be very easy. But if you don't do that on a daily basis, then you are going to complicate the preparation, because moving forward in each and every class, a substantial amount of information will be covered. So for a student who is very new, so because we know that till the time you are in school and college, every class a very limited information is given. But if you go like that, the preparation itself to cover the syllabus of UPSC itself, it will take 5 years time. And then for you to prepare and then to do that, it will be a 1 decade plan, which I don't want you to do. So what you'll have to do is you'll have to clear this examination as early as possible. And for that, you'll have to keep pace with the class. You don't have to do anything extra, at least for subject polity. At least try to cover what is there in the class. If you're doing extra, it is up to you. But the minimum thing that the minimum program that I'm talking about is try to cover what is there in the class. All right. So now with that, we are almost done with this particular area. Any questions from any of the students? Just take a moment, just go through your notes. If you have any questions, you can ask me. Otherwise, I'll go and I'll give an introduction about the Constituent Assembly of India. But take a moment and then we'll proceed further.
The expansion of power, but these non-official who are increased in number of India.
Please be a little louder. In Morley Minto reforms.
The expansion of power, like the membership was increased, it was of non-officials or Indians.
See, non-officials, as the name suggests, it could be both Indians and Europeans, but they are non-officials. But primarily the idea is that they wanted to increase the Indians among the non-officials. But it is not strictly, nowhere it is mentioned, it is only the Indians. But majorly they wanted to increase the Indians. Okay. Diarchy was abolished in the provinces. The Government of India Act 1935 abolished diarchy in the provinces, but they introduced diarchy in the center. So somehow they brought in. So you don't have to worry about it. You just remember that. Okay. Same. Imperial Legislative Council is representing to Central Legislative Council. Or in other words, it is called as what? Central Legislative Council, which was there in Kolkata. That is Calcutta. That is what is called as Imperial Legislative Council. So wherever you come across a statement Imperial Legislative Council, what is the reference or the meaning you should have? It is a Central Legislative Council. Any other doubt? Any doubts from the online students? So let me just look at the online students. Ishwari, Janvi, Rohan, Rishabh, Nikita, Abhinav, Utkarsh, Soumya, Gaurav, and few more students, of course. So online students, some of you have sent me the answers, but because as I already said, I was little unwell for the last couple of days. So from today, I'll try to evaluate and give some response to the students. Okay. All right. Any questions from the online students? All right. Shall I move forward to the next area? A brief introduction about the Constituent Assembly of India. Okay, so let me just go to the Constituent Assembly of India. Before that, let me ask this particular question. Do you know who put forward this idea of Constituent Assembly? Not exactly the word Constituent Assembly, but the idea of India should be ruled by Indians. Who put forward this particular idea? No, M. Roy coined this term Constituent Assembly. But my question is, who put forward this idea that the destiny of India should be in the hands of Indians? Or who put forward that India should be governed by the Indians? The destiny of India should be decided by the Indians. Who? It was Mahatma Gandhi who put forward this particular idea. so that the destiny of India should be decided by the Indians. He did not use the word Constituent Assembly, but indirectly his idea is, yes, there should be a Constituent Assembly. Way back in 1922, he's put this particular idea. So you're all talking about Swaraj and all those things, but the coin that I told, that the destiny should be decided by the Indians, or only the Indians who can take the India in the right direction. So this idea was put by Mahatma Gandhi in 1922. And then subsequently, you know that he was very influential in the Indian National Congress, although he did not actively take part in the politics. And his idea was well taken by the Indian National Congress. And then subsequently, in 1935, the Indian National Congress made it official that India should have its own Constituent Assembly. And they started demanding it officially to the Britishers. But however, the Britishers has not given this offer for a long period of time. The Britishers were willing to give this offer only after what is called as the Cripps Mission. So in the Cripps Mission, first time they put forward, yes, that we'll allow you to have your own Constituent Assembly provided that you cooperate in the war, the Second World War. You know that 1939 to 1944-45, Second World War happened, and they desperately was in need of the Indian Army to support them, and for which a mission was sent to India, which is called as the Cripps Mission. I think you might have read all these things in your history. And there was a 3-member who was part of this Cripps mission. Can you recollect the name? Sometimes they can ask you the name also, although not in the polity, but sometimes in history they can ask you. But anyways, I just want to discuss it. Very good. It was Mr. A.V. Alexander, Mr. Pethick Lawrence, and Stafford Cripps. All the 3 members are ministers in the British cabinet. Under the leadership of Cripps, they were sent to India. And what was the major reason why they were sent to India? They wanted to seek the Indian cooperation in the war. That is, the political parties to accept the Indian army to take part in the Second World War. And largely they accepted. On what condition that in India they were accepted the Indian army to participate? That they promised that after the war is over, that they will establish a Constituent Assembly for India. So on this ground they accepted. But however, it did not happen for a long time, and subsequently, based on which plan do you think that the Constituent Assembly was established? Based on what is called as Cabinet Mission Plan. Okay, so this is very, very important. So what was a plan based on which the Constituent Assembly was established? It was Cabinet Mission Plan. Now, do you know what is the reason why the Cabinet Mission Plan was sent to India? Why was a Cabinet Mission was sent to India? And what was this Cabinet Mission Plan? 1946. I think somewhere in March, April, this Cabinet Mission was coming to India. It had discussions with multiple political parties. And in fact, the Muslim League was asking for a separate Pakistan and a separate Constituent Assembly for Pakistan. But this proposal of the Muslim League was rejected by the Constituent Assembly. Do you know what is the reason why they rejected this? There is? Where? No. Because they have rejected this idea, it was not separately mentioned. But my question is, what was the reason for the Cabinet Mission? Because till this point of time, we are talking about they are doing divide and rule policy. But then why the Cabinet Mission was not in favor of separate Pakistan? It was too difficult for whom? For the Cabinet Mission Plan for the Britishers to divide. Okay, if you look into one of the primary reasons, there could be multiple reasons, but one of the primary reason is till the time they ruled India, they wanted the Indians to be divided. But when the time that they wanted to leave India, they wanted India to be a united country because united India is a big strength. They thought that in the future, always India will support them. So therefore, they wanted a united India. That is one of the reasons they don't want India to be divided into India and Pakistan. They rejected the proposal of what is called a separate Pakistan. Anyways, now the Cabinet Mission Plan, do you know why it was sent to India? The Cabinet Mission Plan was sent to India because by the time in 1946, there was a major change that was happening in UK. After the Second World War was over, a new government has come. That is the Labour Party, and which was always empathetic towards the Indian cause, that is giving freedom to India. So there the Labour Party decided sooner or later they will give freedom, independence to India, and before giving independence they wanted to make sure that there's a responsible transfer of power. So till the time who was carrying out the administration in India? It was the Britishers. But once the independence is given, the Indians themselves have to carry out the administration. So therefore, to give a responsible transfer of power, they need to have a mechanism where they can responsibly govern. And the first thing that they decided for this is that India should have a constitution to govern after independence. And for the constitution to be there, they need to have a body to establish or to draft the constitution, and for which they wanted to establish what is called as a Constituent Assembly. And what is the mechanism by which this Constituent Assembly is to be established? For this, a mission was sent to India. And that mission is basically what is called as the Cabinet Mission. And they had discussion with the multiple parties, including Indian National Congress, the Muslim League, and the other parties. And finally, they came to a conclusion as to how the Constituent Assembly is to be established. And they decided that there will be only one Constituent Assembly for both the countries, or for the entire British India. That is, was decided by the Cabinet Mission Plan. And based on the plan, do you know when it was established? It was established in, I think, June 1946. By June 1946, the Constituent Assembly was established. So few dates I'll discuss. And when the Constituent Assembly met for the first time? 9th December 1946. They met for the first time. I'm not discussing about the scheme of the Constituent Assembly. In fact, that is the most important thing as to what is the composition of the Constituent Assembly and all those things. But I'll discuss that in the next class. 9th December, they met for the first time. And in 9th December, they elected an interim president. Who is the interim president? Dr. Sachidananda Sinha. Okay, so it was Dr. Sachidananda Sinha who was the first interim president. 11th December 1946, the regular president was elected. Who was the regular president? It was Dr. Rajendra Prasad, who continued to be the president of the Constituent Assembly till the time the Constituent Assembly adopted the Constitution of India. And when was the Constituent Assembly adopted the Constitution? 26 November 1946. And when did it came into force? 26th Jan 1950. And then subsequently India became a republic. So till this point of time, India was a dominion. The moment the Constitution came into force, it became what is called as the republic. And then henceforth on 26 January 1950, India is to be governed based on what? No, on the basis of the Constitution of India. So before 26 January 1950, it was based on the Government of India Act 1935. But on 26 January and after, India is to be governed by the Constitution of India. Based on the Constitution of India, I said India is a republic. So therefore, India needs to have an elected head of the state. And then subsequently, who was elected as a president of India? It was Dr. Rajendra Prasad. So Dr. Rajendra Prasad then became the president of India. But till the time the Constituent Assembly and the Constitution was adopted, he was also the the president of the Constituent Assembly. Okay, so try to have all these things. So this is the basic understanding you should have. But one question that I wanted to ask is, okay, the major function of the Constituent Assembly of India is to draft the Constitution. But is that the only function of the Constituent Assembly? What is the other function of the Constituent Assembly? Very good. They are also the Provisional Parliament of India. That means they are also free to make ordinary laws, apart from drafting the Constitution of India to govern India. That means basically they are free to amend the Government of India Act 1935 also, if they want to amend, to carry out the administration. So they are also the Provisional Parliament. But majorly they are also performing what? Drafting the Constitution of India. And in drafting the Constitution of India, just one last question, let me see who can answer this. Is it the preamble that was first to be drafted, or it is not the preamble that is first to be drafted? Not the preamble? Now, but in the Constitution, if you see, the preamble is the first thing. But you are saying that the preamble was not the first to be drafted. So how many? I want you to just rethink on this and answer this particular question. Is the preamble first to be drafted? No. but in the constitution it is there. It is the first thing. Okay, there is one more significant date that I wanted to say. 9th December for the first time they met. 11th December the president was elected. 13th December Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru introduced what is called as the Objectives Resolution. Okay, in the next class when you come, I'll ask you what is this Objectives Resolution. And not only what is this Objectives Resolution, I'll also ask the question of the preamble, whether it was first to be drafted. If you say it is not first to be drafted, then what is the reason why it is not the first to be drafted? So I want answers to both the questions in the next class. But in the next class, I'll discuss in detail the composition of the Constituent Assembly. That is in fact very, very important. So what was the composition, from where the representatives came, whether they were elected or nominated, all these things are to be understood in the next class. All right. So with that, I'll wind up the class for today. If you have any questions, I'll just take up for a couple of minutes. Otherwise, we can wind up the session for today.